Roman Kessler leaned back in his chair, whiskey in hand, and laughed. Not the polished laugh he used at charity dinners, or the restrained smile he offered judges at fundraising galas. This was something rawer, the kind of laugh men only allow themselves when they believe no women are listening. Gavin said she sent it during the fitting. One of his captains said, "Full length. You could see everything." Roman didn't deny it. He raised his glass instead. "She wanted me to appreciate the dress," he said. "I appreciated what was underneath it." The room erupted. 7 minutes. That's all that stood between Evelyn Ashford and the rest of her life. 7 minutes before she was supposed to walk down an aisle toward the man she believed had chosen her above everything. 7 minutes before she became Mrs. Roman Kessler, wife of one of Chicago's most feared men, sealed inside a marriage that the most powerful families in the city had spent 2 years arranging. She heard every word through the cracked sunroom door. And the woman who walked away from that door was not the same woman who had pressed her ear against it. If you've ever trusted someone, completely handed them the most private parts of yourself, and truly believed, they were holding those parts with care, then you already understand what Evelyn felt in that hallway. You understand it in your chest before your mind even catches up. This is her story, and it does not go the way Roman Kessler planned. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe right now because the stories on this channel do not pull punches, and you do not want walk in halfway through. Hit the like button, drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. The morning of her wedding, Evelyn Ashford woke up at 5:15. Not because she was nervous, not because bridesmaids were already texting, or because the florist had called twice with questions about centerpiece height. She woke up because she always woke up at 5:15. 2 years with Roman Kessler had turned her body into a kind of clock breakfast at 7, swim at 8, weigh in before lunch, light dinner by 6. The structure had felt, at first, like love, like someone caring enough to pay attention. She lay in the hotel suite and stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet. Camille was asleep in the adjoining room. Her maid of honor, her younger sister, the only person in Evelyn's life who had ever looked at Roman Kessler with something close to open distrust. Camille slept like a person with a clear conscience, which meant she went out at 11 and didn't surface until someone physically shook her shoulder. Evelyn had always envied that. The ability to simply stop thinking and go dark. Evelyn couldn't do that. She hadn't been able to do that in a long time. She got up and stood at the window. Lake Michigan was flat and gray in the early morning, the kind of color that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be beautiful or threatening. She had grown up beside this lake, swum in it since she was 9 years old, back when swimming was just something her body did because it wanted to, not something she tracked in a notebook and reported on. The dress was hanging near the closet. She didn't look at it. At 7, the suite filled up. Hair, makeup. Champagne she didn't want but accepted because refusing it would prompt questions. Her mother, Patricia Ashford, arrived at 7:40 carrying the veil and a controlled expression that communicated, as it always did, that the correct thing was happening, and therefore nothing should threaten it. Grant Ashford, her father, knocked at 8:15 and stood in the doorway looking at his daughter in her robe, with her hair half done. And something moved across his face, something private and complicated, and then he smiled and said she looked beautiful and backed out of the room. By 10, the suite smelled like hairspray and white roses and 3 different women's perfume, and Evelyn sat in the center of it, with a professional smile fixed to her face and a feeling in her stomach that she had been trying to name for 2 days. She had almost named it the night before, lying awake in the same bed while Camille slept 6 feet away. She had almost grabbed the thread of it, but then her phone buzzed with a goodnight message from Roman tomorrow. "You're mine, Ev." All of it. Everything, and she had smiled at the screen the way she'd learned to smile and put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling until 4 in the morning. The feeling had no name yet, but it was there. Roman Kessler's organization controlled 7 distinct revenue streams across Chicago's north and west sides. He had 17 men he trusted with money, and 3 he trusted with everything else. He owned partial stakes in 4 legitimate businesses, 2 of which his lawyers had structured so cleanly that a federal audit 3 years ago had found nothing worth pursuing. He had sat across tables from men who had spent their careers learning how to read people, and those men had walked away believing Roman Kessler was reasonable, measured, and difficult to rattle. He was all of those things. He was also, by midnight the night before his wedding, drunk in a sunroom with his captains, passing around a cell phone. The photograph was from 3 weeks earlier. Evelyn had sent it during her final dress, fitting a private moment she'd shared, because Roman had texted, asking how it was going, and she'd been feeling genuinely happy. One of those rare, uncomplicated moments of happiness that come before you start examining them too closely. She'd sent it without thinking twice. It was the kind of thing you did with someone you trusted. Roman had kept it. He had not deleted it, had not forgotten it existed, had not protected it the way a man protects something private that was given to him in good faith. He had shared it with Gavin Rourke, his lieutenant, and the man who functioned as the organizational memory of everything Roman's empire had ever needed to remember. And Gavin had apparently shared details in their private channel, the encrypted group that Evelyn, lying awake that same night, had no idea existed. By morning, 4 of Roman's closest men knew about the scar beneath Evelyn's left shoulder blade. 3 of them knew about the birthmark on her hip. 2 had made jokes about it. Roman had laughed at every single one. The ceremony was scheduled for noon, on the terrace overlooking the lake. At 11:53, Evelyn was in the hallway outside the main suite, alone for approximately 40 seconds, while her mother stepped back inside for something, and Camille was still in the elevator. 40 seconds was enough. The sunroom door was 3 inches open, and the voices carrying through it were not being careful, because the men inside it had no reason to believe anyone who mattered was listening. She heard Gavin first. His voice was the distinctive one, slightly flat, the voice of a man who considered his own words carefully, even when he was being careless. She's got good instincts in the water. You can see it in her shoulders. You can see a lot in that photograph, someone said. Laughter. Roman, I'm serious, the one she sent from the fitting. If she keeps up the swimming after the pregnancies, she'll keep up whatever I tell her to keep up. More laughter. Easier this time. The relaxed laughter of men who have been told yes for a long time. Then Gavin again. What about the scar? She's self-conscious about that. And Roman's voice, warm and certain she used to be. I talked her out of it. Took months. Evelyn's hand had gone flat against the wall. She was not breathing correctly. The birthmark's worse, one of the others said. Or better, depending on. She stopped listening because her brain had already done the calculation. The birthmark, the scar, these were not things she had described to a group of men. She had told Roman, privately, carefully, in moments that felt protected. The birthmark during a conversation on his boat 2 summers ago. A sound like green wood splitting when she'd been wearing a swimsuit and self-conscious, and he'd kissed the spot and said it was beautiful, and she had believed him so completely that the memory of it had lived in her body as something warm. Someone in that room knew where it was, which meant Roman had described it, or shown them, or both. She pushed off the wall, walked 3 steps down the hallway. Stopped. Her breathing was wrong, her hands were cold. The feeling she'd been trying to name for 2 days had just named itself, and it was not a feeling she had language, for yet it was more like a wall she had walked into without seeing it. And now she was standing on the other side of it, and everything looked different from here. She opened her phone. Roman's last message was still on the screen. Tomorrow you're mine, Ev. All of it. She scrolled up past it. Past 30 messages. Past the goodnight texts and the dinner photographs and the voice note he'd sent from a business trip in April where he'd said, quietly, that he missed the sound of her in the kitchen in the morning. She had listened to that voice note 6 times the week he sent it. 6 times. She had told Camille about it. She had believed it. She kept scrolling and tried to think clearly, which was harder than it should have been, because her heart was doing something involuntary, and her dress weighed 14 pounds, and the noise from the sunroom was still drifting through the cracked door. She going to give you trouble about the Mercer dinner? No, Roman said. She does what I ask. A pause. Then more quietly, she always has. Evelyn Ashford was not by nature an impulsive person. She had spent 34 years making careful decisions. She had chosen her university major with a spreadsheet. She had taken 6 months. She had taken 6 accepting Roman's first dinner invitation, because something about the certainty in his eyes had made her want to be sure she was choosing it and not simply being chosen. She had told herself, repeatedly, that the way he organized her life was attentiveness, not control, that a man who cared about your sleep schedule and your protein intake and whether your gym bag had the right equipment was as a man who saw you. She had told herself this so many times that she had stopped examining whether it was true. Standing in that hallway, her dress heavy around her ankles and her hands shaking slightly in a way she refused to give into, Evelyn made a decision in approximately 4 seconds that would take her years to fully understand. She did not run. She did not cry. She did not go back to the suite and tell her mother and watch Patricia Ashford's face do the thing it did when something inconvenient interrupted a plan. Took out her phone, opened the screen, a sound like green wood splitting, and photographed every visible message on Roman's phone that she could reach from the position he'd left his device charging on the hall table outside the main suite. Left there because Roman didn't like phones in rooms where men were talking seriously. He had his own rules about information. He had simply never applied them in her direction. She screenshotted everything she could see. She didn't know yet exactly what she had. She knew it was something. Then she texted Camille, one word, hallway. Camille appeared from the elevator 30 seconds later, still pulling an earring in, and took one look at her sister's face and stopped cold. Tell me, Camille said. Not here. Evelyn's voice was completely steady. That surprised her. Honestly, she had expected it to crack, but instead it came out flat and controlled, like something that had been pressed into a very specific shape. Come with me. They stepped into the far stairwell. A sound like green wood splitting, away from the catering staff and the florist's assistant and the 2 men from Roman's organization, who were stationed near the elevator looking like they were simply standing there, which meant they were doing something specific. Evelyn told Camille what she'd heard, quickly, without softening it. Camille listened without interrupting, which was not her natural state. Camille Ashford interrupted everything. It was one of her defining characteristics. She had done it since she was 4 years old. She didn't interrupt this. When Evelyn finished, Camille stood very still for a moment. The photograph from the fitting, she said. Yes. He showed them. He showed them. Another silence. The kind that meant something was being decided. Okay, Camille said. And the way she said it, not panicked, not calculating, just okay. Like a woman accepting a set of facts and preparing to move through them, made Evelyn feel, for the first time since the hallway, like her feet were touching the ground. What do you want to do? Camille asked. Evelyn looked at her phone, then at the stairwell door, then at her sister's face. I want to go downstairs, she said. 211 people were seated on the terrace when Evelyn Ashford appeared at the top of the staircase on her father's arm. Grant Ashford had been told approximately 90 seconds before the processional music began that something was wrong. He had not been told what. Evelyn had simply taken his arm in the corridor and said quietly, "Stay with me, whatever happens." And Grant, who had spent 40 years building a reputation as a man who did not show his reactions publicly, had looked at his daughter's face and said nothing at all and kept walking. The guests stood. The music played. Roman stood beneath the arch at the end of the aisle with his hands folded in front of him and the expression of a man receiving something he had earned. And when he saw Evelyn at the top of the stairs, he smiled the smile she had loved for 2 years, warm, private, certain, and she walked toward it. She walked all the way to him. She took her place beside him. She let the officiant begin. And then, after the first formal welcome, when the officiant paused for a breath, Evelyn turned and took the wireless microphone from the sound assistant, standing 3 feet away, before anyone understood what she was doing. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Roman's smile didn't disappear. It changed. Shifted into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite alarm. Something suspended between the two, that a careful observer would recognize as a man reassessing a situation he believed he had controlled. "I have a question," Evelyn said. Her voice carried clearly across the terrace. "For Roman." Behind her, she could feel 200 people holding their breath. Beside her, she could feel her father's arm go rigid. Roman looked at her. He said nothing. He was waiting. The way men like Roman wait, not passively, but with the specific stillness of someone measuring the distance between themselves and a problem. "Did you share a private photograph of me with your friends?" Question landed in the silence, like something dropped from a height. She watched it hit him. His jaw tightened, just slightly. The kind of movement that most people would miss, and that Evelyn had spent 2 years learning to read. Because Roman Kessler communicated a great deal through the things he did not do, and she had been a close reader of him for a long time. Now she applied everything she'd learned. "Evelyn," his voice was low, controlled. The tone he used when he was redirecting her in private. It's a simple question," she said. "Did you share a private photograph of me with your friends? Yes or no?" Roman looked at her for a long moment. She held the microphone steady and looked back. Somewhere in the 200 seats, someone's chair scraped the stone. Roman said quietly, "It was one photograph, and the wedding was over." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The microphone was doing the work, and the silence was doing the rest. She asked how Gavin Rourke knew about the scar on her shoulder. She asked how 3 of his captains knew the location of her birthmark. She watched Roman attempt, twice, to walk the conversation back towards something manageable, and she let him attempt it. And then she asked the question again, in different words. And the second time, he couldn't answer without making it worse. "You're embarrassing yourself," Roman said, finally. Quietly, the way he said things in private when she'd pushed in a direction he didn't want. "I'm embarrassing you," she said. "That's different." She slid the engagement ring off her finger. It caught the noonlight. Roman had picked it himself, had spent weeks, he'd told her, finding exactly the right one. And she had believed that story completely, and carried it as evidence of his love, and she set it on the surface of the altar table. "There is not going to be a wedding," she said. Then she handed the microphone back, took on her saw, and walked away from Roman Kessler in front of every person he had ever wanted to. Grant Ashford walked with her without a word. His jaw was set in a way she recognized the expression he wore when he was doing something that cost him something, and doing it anyway. She gripped his arm and kept her eyes forward, and the two of them walked off that terrace together while 200 people sat in absolute silence. Camille fell into step behind them at the staircase, and Roman stood beneath the flower arch above Lake Michigan, alone for the first time in a very long time. The hotel suite felt different when she returned to it. Smaller, somehow. More honest. The champagne glasses were still on the table, and the veil was still draped over the chair, and the flowers Roman's assistant had arranged that morning were still sitting in their vases, looking expensive and deliberate. And Evelyn stood in the middle of it and felt the adrenaline beginning to drain, and what replaced it was not relief. It was something colder, something that required more examination. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in the dress, still with the pins in her hair, and looked at the screenshots on her phone. She had captured partial messages, fragments, enough to confirm what she'd heard through the door, but not enough to understand the shape of what she'd been living inside. The shape, she sensed, was larger than a photograph. Camille sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. "He said it was one photograph," Camille said eventually. "He said a lot of things," Evelyn replied. She looked at the messages on her phone. The warmth of them, the careful architecture of attention Roman had built around her, the meal suggestions, the training schedules, the gentle observations as about her sleep, the way he had positioned himself as the person who understood her body better than she did herself. She had taken it as devotion. Now she was trying to remember when she had stopped swimming because she wanted to and started swimming, because Roman had an opinion about what her body looked like, and she could not locate the exact moment. It had not been a single moment. That was the problem. It had been 1,000 small ones, each of them reasonable on its own, each of them adding something to an architecture she had never seen the full blueprint of. She was looking at the blueprint now. Her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She stared at it for a moment, then answered. The voice on the other end was male. "Careful somewhere. Between cautious and urgent, Ms. Ashford," the man said. "My name is Silas Mercer. I'm calling because you deserve to know what you were actually inside, and what Roman Kessler is actually afraid of." Evelyn looked at Camille. Camille looked back. Outside the window, Lake Michigan had finally decided what it was going to be today. It was going to be gray. Silas Mercer did not sound like a man who made phone calls easily. There was something in the pauses between his sentences, not hesitation exactly. More like a man measuring each word against some internal cost he'd already calculated and accepted. Evelyn had spent enough time around Roman's world to recognize the difference between someone being careful and someone being afraid. Silas was both. "How did you get this number?" she asked. Roman's assistant had it on file. "I have access to some of Roman's files." A beat. Had access. That distinction is going to matter soon. Camille was watching Evelyn's face, the way she'd watched it their whole lives, reading it, the way younger siblings learn to read older ones, picking up signals before they became words. Evelyn held up one finger and Camille went still. "What do you want, Mr. Mercer?" "To give you something before Roman's people start moving," Silas said. "There's a window right now, maybe 6 hours, maybe less, where the information I have can actually help you. After that, people start making decisions about what gets buried and what doesn't, and you lose the ability to choose which side of that you're on." "I already chose," Evelyn said. "I chose it about 40 minutes ago in front of 200 people." "What you did this morning was personal," Silas said. "What I'm talking about is structural. Those are different problems." She stood up from the edge of the bed. The dress made it awkward. 14 pounds of structured fabric and bone that had been designed for a specific occasion that was no longer happening. She reached back and began pulling pins from her hair. With one hand, the phone pressed against her shoulder. "Talk," she said. Silas talked. He had been part of Roman's organization for 11 years, not a captain, not muscle, something in between. A fixer, though that word was too clean for what he actually did. He managed information. He knew which conversations had happened, in which rooms, which agreements had been made verbally, and therefore deniably, which men owed Roman what and why. It was the kind of position that made you useful and also made you dangerous, and Silas had spent 11 years walking that line with the careful precision of a man who understood exactly how thin it was. The group Evelyn had heard mentioned the encrypted channel Gavin Rand had started, Silas said, as exactly what it sounded like. Men being men in private, photographs, comments, the usual ugliness that powerful men engage in when they believe no one outside their circle will ever see it. But Gavin Rourke was not a man who did things without a secondary purpose. He started keeping records, Silas said. Not just the photographs. Everything. Who sent what, when, with what context. He logged conversations. He cross-referenced personal information against financial information. Over time, it stopped being a place where men acted badly and became a place where Gavin collected evidence of men acting badly. Evelyn had gone still beside the window. "He built leverage," she said. "He built an archive," Silas corrected. "He'd call it a ledger." That's what he called it internally, the ledger. Every entry documented. Every man in that group had a file. Financial crimes, personal indiscretions, private information shared without consent, favors asked and received. Judges, aldermen, 3 state-level officials, 2 federal contacts, and every mafia-aligned family in Chicago with any relationship to Roman's organization. The lake outside was very gray and very flat. Roman knew, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. Roman knew the ledger existed. He didn't know the full scope of it until about 8 months ago. Silas paused. He thought he was benefiting from the system. He didn't fully grasp that he was also inside it. And now the ledger is missing. A duplicate of it. And because of what happened this morning, because of you, Ms. Ashford, because you just cracked Roman's public image in front of every powerful person in his network, some of those men are going to start asking questions about what else might come out. And when powerful men start asking nervous questions, they look for something to point at. Evelyn understood where this was going. They're going to point at me, she said. Someone already is, Silas said. That's why I'm calling. She got out of the dress 20 minutes later, alone in the bathroom, pulling the zipper herself because she was not asking anyone for help with it. The fabric pooled on the tile floor and she stepped out of it and stood there in the bathroom light feeling. For a strange dislocated moment, like someone who had just survived something she hadn't fully understood was dangerous while she was inside it. She pulled on jeans and a sweater from her overnight bag. Her hair was still half pinned. She pulled the remaining pins out and dropped them on the counter and looked at herself in the mirror and looked away. When she came back into the suite, Camille had opened the champagne not celebratorily, just practically, the way Camille approached most things that were available and useful, and poured 2 glasses and was sitting cross-legged on the bed, looking at something on her phone. Mom called 4 times, Camille said. I know. Dad called once. I know. Roman's assistant called twice from a number I don't recognize. That one we ignore. Camille handed her a glass. Evelyn sat in the armchair across from the bed and held it without drinking, and told her sister what Silas had said, because Camille was going to need to know all of it. And because Evelyn had learned in the last hour that she could not afford to manage information the way Roman had taught her to, selectively, protectively, as a form of control dressed up as care. She told Camille everything. When she finished, Camille was quiet for a moment, which was, again, not her natural state. A ledger, Camille said. That's what he called it. With files on judges and federal contacts and everyone who ever used the system. Camille stared at the champagne in her glass. Roman has a file. Roman has a file, Evelyn confirmed. And someone thinks you have the duplicate. Someone already told Roman that. That's what Silas thinks. Evelyn finally drank. The champagne was too cold and tasted like a party that was happening somewhere else. Which means Roman is going to come to me before long. Not to apologize, to find out what I know. Camille looked up. What do you know, right now? Enough to be dangerous, and not enough to be protected. She set the glass down. I need to talk to Silas in person, Evelyn. Camille's voice had shifted, not alarmed exactly, but careful in a way she didn't usually bother being. This is Roman's world. We're not... I know whose world it is. Evelyn stood up. That's why I need to understand it before he decides to explain it to me his way. Patricia Ashford arrived at the suite at 2:15, and the conversation that followed was one of the worst Evelyn had experienced in a year full of bad conversations. Her mother was not a cruel woman. That was the most complicated thing about her. Patricia operated from a system of beliefs that were genuinely, completely her own, and within that system she was consistent and devoted, and not without love. She simply believed, with the quiet certainty of someone who had never had to seriously question it, that the correct way to navigate the world was to make a decision and protect it. And she had decided 2 years ago that Roman Kessler was the decision. She came in wearing the blue dress she'd chosen for the wedding she hadn't changed. Told Evelyn something about the state her mother was in, and she sat down across from her daughter and folded her hands in her lap and said very carefully, "Tell me what happened." Evelyn told her, the version she could verify, the photograph, the conversation through the door, what she'd heard Gavin say. Patricia listened. Her expression did not change significantly. Patricia Ashford had very good control of her face, which was another thing she and Roman had in common, though Evelyn had not thought about it quite that way before. When Evelyn finished, her mother said, "Did you consider speaking to him privately first?" The silence after that was significant. "No," Evelyn said. "He might have had an explanation. He admitted it in front of 200 people. He admitted to one photograph," Patricia said. "That's different from what you're describing." Mom, Evelyn kept her voice level. It cost her. They knew about my scar. They knew about my birthmark. Things I told Roman in private. He shared them. You don't know how. There's no other way they could know. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. There is other explanation. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the Mercer family was at the ceremony. And the alderman. And Judge Hartley, I'm aware of who was there. These are relationships that took years to build. My father walked off that terrace with me, Evelyn said. Without being asked, that landed. She watched it, Land watched something move through her mother's composed expression, something that was not quite guilt, but was adjacent to it. Grant Ashford had walked away. That fact meant something that Patricia had not yet figured out how to process. "I'm not asking you to agree with what I did," Evelyn said, more quietly. "I'm telling you why I did it, and I'm telling you it's done." Patricia stood up. She smoothed the front of her dress, a gesture Evelyn recognized as her mother buying time while she reorganized. "Roman will call your father. Let him. The families. Let them." Her mother looked at her for a long moment with an expression Evelyn couldn't fully read, something that might have been grief or respect or the specific pain of a woman watching her daughter do something she herself had never quite managed. Then she left without another word, and the suite was quiet again. Camille, who had sat through the entire exchange, without saying a single thing, looked at Evelyn and said, "That was the most painful thing I've ever watched you do." "It was the second most painful thing I did today," Evelyn said. By 4 o'clock, the screenshots were circulating. Not the ones Evelyn had taken. Different ones. More complete ones, fragments of the encrypted channel, pulled and distributed by someone with deeper access than she had. They appeared first in the phones of 3 journalists who Chicago politics and organized crime with the specific energy of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of material. Then they spread sideways into the social networks of the families who'd been at the ceremony. Then they spread further. Evelyn found out when her phone started receiving messages from numbers she didn't recognize, not threatening. Not yet, just the ambient noise of people who suddenly knew who she was in a different way than they had that morning. Camille found out when a contact from law school texted her a screenshot with the message, "Is this your sister?" The fragments in the screenshots were worse than what Evelyn had heard through the door. Not dramatically worse, the core ugliness was the same but more detailed and more organized and covered a longer period of time. Years of conversations, comments about women these men knew socially, professionally, personally. Personal information exchanged as casually as sports scores. Photographs. The kind of documentation that, when laid out in sequence, stopped looking like men behaving badly in private and started looking like something that had been constructed deliberately over a very long time. Roman's name appeared 23 times in the visible fragments. Gavin's appeared 47. 3 other names appeared alongside them, names Evelyn recognized. One was an alderman who had been photographed at the reception that same morning, smiling with a glass of something expensive in a room that now felt like evidence of a different era. One was an executive whose family foundation had been featured twice in the Tribune for its work with at-risk youth. One was a man Evelyn had sat next to at a dinner 6 months ago, a man who had asked her thoughtful questions about her work in urban development and listened carefully to her answers, and she had thought afterward, Roman has good people around him. She sat with her phone and read the fragments and felt something slow and thorough moving through her, not anger, exactly, or not only anger. Something more structural, the sense of a floor dropping away. She had believed, in the way you believe things that you have never had reason to examine, that her own judgment was reliable. That the version of Roman she had constructed from 2 years of evidence was accurate. That she had been a careful reader. She had been reading a performance. Her phone buzzed. Silas. They know about the call. Meet tonight. Bring your sister if you want a witness. Don't tell your father yet. She stared at the message for a moment. Then typed back, where? Roman called at 5:47. She almost didn't answer. Then she picked up because she understood, from everything Silas had told her, that the information inside a conversation with Roman was worth more than the discomfort of having it. Evelyn. His voice was controlled. The version of controlled that was working harder than it looked. I need you to listen to me. I'm listening. What happened this morning? He stopped. She could hear him choosing. What you overheard was not what you think it was. You admitted it was one photograph, she said, in front of 200 people. That was another stop. That was a mistake. Sharing it was a mistake. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. How did Gavin know about my birthmark, Roman? Silence. I described it, he said finally, in a private conversation. I shouldn't have. I know that. You described it, she repeated. To Gavin Rourke. Yes. And the others in the group? The silence this time was longer, more expensive. There are things you don't understand about how that group functioned, Roman said carefully. It started as something different. It became something I didn't fully. Roman, she kept her voice flat. The screenshots are already out. Pause that followed was the longest one yet. When he spoke again, the control in his voice had shifted into something underneath it, something harder and colder and less careful, the thing that was usually behind the performance when the performance stopped being useful. Who gave them to you? He said. It wasn't a question. I don't have them, she said. I don't know who does. Evelyn. His voice had dropped. Not threatening exactly. Roman was too precise for that, too aware of what could be used against him, but the warmth that had been there for 2 years was completely gone, and what was underneath it was something she was only now seeing the full shape of. If someone gave you access to information about our organization, I need to know that. Our organization, she said. I was never part of your organization, Roman. You were going to be my wife. I'm not. Another silence. She could hear him breathing, which was unusual. Roman was very controlled about breathing, about the small physical signals that told other people what was happening inside you. He was not controlled right now. The people asking about the duplicate ledger, he said quietly. They're not going to care that you walked away this morning. They're going to see you as a liability regardless. Because you made me one, she said, by putting me in that group without my knowledge or consent. Every piece of information about me that was ever shared in that channel, you put there, she said. My body, my health, my habits, my vulnerabilities. You put all of it there, and then you called it love, and I believed you, and that is not something I'm going to spend of this conversation letting you reframe. She took a breath. Slow and deliberate. If someone comes to me about a ledger I don't have, I'll tell them I don't have it. That's all I can do, Evelyn. Don't call me again tonight, she said, and hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand, and her heart doing something ugly and involuntary in her chest and let it. Didn't try to control it. Didn't measure it against what she was supposed to feel, or what would be appropriate to feel, or what Roman had, over 2 years, subtly and consistently suggested she feel about her own reactions. She just let it happen, which turned out to be harder than she expected, and also necessary. Camille drove. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat and watched Chicago slide past the windows, the city she'd grown up in. The city Roman had mapped for her over 2 years, in a specific way that she was only beginning to understand was partial, strategic, organized around his version of what she should see and where she should go and who she should understand as trustworthy. She was rebuilding the map in real time. It was disorienting in the specific way that accurate information is disorienting when it replaces inaccurate information you were comfortable with. Silas was waiting at a restaurant in the West Loop, a place Evelyn had never been to, which meant Roman had never taken her there, which in this context felt like a recommendation. He was already seated when they arrived, coffee in front of him, jacket on despite the warmth inside, because Silas Mercer was a man who kept his arms covered. He was older than she'd expected from his voice. Somewhere in his mid-50s, with the specific weathered quality of someone who had spent decades in rooms where bad decisions were made and had managed, through some combination of luck and calculation, not to be the worst decision in any of those rooms. He looked up when they sat down and looked at Evelyn with the particular expression of a man who has just watched someone do something he found genuinely surprising. You ended the wedding, he said. You called me, she said. What do you have? He respected that. She could see it, a small adjustment in his posture, a recalibration. He had expected to spend the first 10 minutes managing her emotional state, and he wasn't going to have to do that, and he was rearranging his approach accordingly. He put his phone on the table, face down, and leaned forward. The ledger is a physical archive, he said, not just digital. Gavin kept hard copies of the most significant documents, the ones that couldn't be denied or explained as fabrications. Photographs with metadata, bank statements, signed correspondence, notarized documents that certain people signed without reading carefully enough. He paused. Been stored in 2 locations. The primary location is somewhere connected to Roman's properties. I don't have the exact address, but I have enough to narrow it down. The duplicate was held by a third party for insurance. What third party? Camille asked. Silas looked at her. A lawyer. Someone outside the organization who held it as a kind of mutual assured destruction if anything happened to Gavin. The duplicate went to investigators automatically. That lawyer, Evelyn said. Is that why the duplicate is missing? The lawyer died, Silas said. 11 weeks ago. Ruled an accident. I don't know if it was. The restaurant was warm and full of the normal sounds of a Tuesday evening, glasses, silverware, a table nearby with someone's birthday being celebrated loudly. And Evelyn sat in the middle of it and felt the shape of what Silas was described sting settle around her like weather. Someone killed a lawyer to get the duplicate, she said. Possibly, he didn't soften it. Or the duplicate moved before anything happened and the death was unrelated. But the timing is bad, Camille said. The timing is very bad, Silas agreed. And what's worse is that Gavin doesn't know where the duplicate went. Roman doesn't know. The men in that group who have exposure in the ledger don't know. And the working theory, the one that started circulating about 3 hours ago, is that the lawyer gave it to Samson for safekeeping before he died. He looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. Roman told you, she said. Roman told his captains. His captains are not careful men. Silas picked up his coffee cup and set it down without drinking. The theory is that the lawyer knew about you, about the wedding, about the fact that Roman's world was going to become your world. He might have decided that you were the safest recipient. I've never met this lawyer, Evelyn said. I know. I don't have a ledger. I know that too. Silas looked at her steadily. But Gavin doesn't. And there are 3 other men in Roman's network who don't. And those men are not going to operate on the benefit of the doubt. The birthday table nearby burst into applause. Someone's candles were being blown out. Evelyn looked at her hands on the table. Thought about the 47 times Gavin's name appeared in the screenshots. Thought about the lawyer dying 11 weeks ago. Thought about Roman's voice on the phone. 40 minutes earlier, the specific shift from performance into something colder underneath. The thing she had been living adjacent to for 2 years without being willing to name it. She had ended the wedding. She had believed, somewhere in the clean, simple logic of the gesture, that ending the wedding was an ending. That the action had a shape, and the shape had a finish. She understood now that it didn't. What do you need from me? She said. Silas looked at her for a moment, the particular look of a man who has spent a long time being careful and is now making a choice to be less careful than he is comfortable being. I need you to help me find the primary archive, he said. Before Gavin does. Before Roman does. If we find it first, you have protection. Real protection, the kind that doesn't depend on what Roman decides to do or what his men decide to believe about you. And if we don't find it first, Silas picked up his coffee. This time he drank. Then you spend the next year being the woman who knows something, he said. And in Roman Kessler's world, that is a very uncomfortable position to be standing in for very long. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. Around her, the restaurant hummed with the ordinary business of people eating dinner on a Tuesday and not being in the middle of anything. She had not eaten since 6 that morning. She had not slept properly in 2 days. She was sitting in a restaurant with a man she'd spoken to for the first time 4 hours ago, being told that the empire she had just publicly walked away from was not finished with her, that walking away was only the beginning of something she had not chosen and could not now unchoose. She thought about Roman's voice. You were going to be my wife. She thought about the way he had said it, not with grief, not with love, but with the specific weight of a man referencing a category, a position, a role in a structure. Not I was going to have you, not I loved you, but you were going to be my wife. The way you'd say someone was going to be a business partner, a shareholder, a piece in an arrangement. That was what she had been to him. She saw it completely now. Not because he was entirely without feeling, but because feeling for Roman had always existed downstream of utility. He had felt something for her. He had also been managing her for 2 years, and those 2 things had coexisted in him without apparent conflict. She was done being managed. All right, Evelyn said. Camille looked at her. Evelyn, all right, she said again, steadier. Tell me where you think the primary archive is. Silas reached into his jacket pocket and laid a folded piece of paper on the table. She reached for it, and somewhere across the city, in a waterfront property on Chicago Harbor, Gavin Rourke was standing in front of Roman Kessler, and neither of them was smiling. And the conversation they were having had just moved past the kind where outcomes could be managed with careful words into the kind where they couldn't. A piece of paper had an address on it, not a full address, a block, a property description, a reference to a boathouse on the south end of a private marina off Chicago Harbor. Silas had written it in the careful, slightly compressed handwriting of a man who had spent years writing things he expected to destroy afterward. The paper itself was ordinary, the kind you pulled from a notepad beside a hotel phone. Evelyn looked at it for a moment, then folded it and put it in her jacket pocket. "How sure are you?" she asked. 70%, Silas said, which in my experience is about as sure as anything gets before you actually look. And if we're wrong, then we try the second location. But there isn't much time for being wrong. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Gavin's been meeting with Roman at the harbor properties twice in the last week. I don't think that's coincidence. I think Gavin already suspects the primary archive is compromised and he's trying to move it before anyone else reaches it. "So we have hours," Silas said. "Maybe less." Camille had been quiet through most of this, which meant she was thinking hard, which meant she was about to say something Evelyn would need to hear and not necessarily want to. Evelyn waited. "We need to tell Dad," Camille said. "Evelyn's," I started to answer. "Not because he can fix it," Camille continued, "and not to ask permission. Because if this goes sideways and he finds out later that we knew and didn't tell him, we lose him. And right now, he's the only person in our family whose resources we might actually need." Evelyn looked at the table. Silas said nothing, which she appreciated. He understood this was a conversation he wasn't part of. She thought about her father's face in the corridor that morning. "Stay with me, whatever happens." The way he had said nothing and kept walking. The way he had walked off that terrace without being asked, without being explained to, purely on the evidence of his daughter's expression. Grant Ashford had spent 40 years building things. He understood structure. He understood when a structure was compromised and what it cost to let it stand versus what it cost to tear it down. "I'll call him," Evelyn said. "Not tonight. Tomorrow morning." Early, Camille accepted this. Silas accepted this. The birthday table nearby had gone quiet. The celebration apparently concluded. The candles out. They left the restaurant at 8:40. The black sedan was parked across the street from Evelyn's apartment building when Camille pulled up. Neither of them said anything for a moment. It was a dark-colored car, nondescript, positioned with the specific casualness of something that had been placed deliberately to look incidental. The engine was off. The windows were tinted enough that you couldn't see inside from the street. "That was there this morning, too," Camille said quietly. Evelyn had seen it. When she'd left for the hotel, at 7 a.m. had registered it and filed it under the category of things she'd noticed and not acted on, because that was what the last 2 years had trained her to do. Notice things. File them. Not make a thing of them. She was done filing. "Drive past," she said. "Don't slow down." Camille drove past. Neither of them looked directly at the car. In her peripheral vision, Evelyn watched it. It didn't move. They went to Camille's apartment, which was 12 blocks away and which Roman had been to exactly once, 3 years ago, before things had become serious. He had not liked it too small, too chaotic, books everywhere, Camille's particular organizational system, which defied external logic, and he had said so with the gentle certainty of a man whose opinions were always framed as observations. Camille had smiled at him and said nothing, and afterward told Evelyn that she didn't trust him, which Evelyn had filed away under the same category. She was building a very large archive of things she had filed away and not acted on. The apartment was warm. Camille's cat, an enormous gray animal named after a Supreme Court justice, materialized from somewhere and sat on Evelyn's feet, which was either comfort or territorial behavior, and possibly both. Evelyn sat on the couch and opened her phone and looked at what was now circulating publicly. The screenshots had reached 3 news outlets. 2 had published fragments with minimal context. One had gone further, had reached someone with enough knowledge of Chicago's political structure to annotate the names, had published a piece that was careful in its language and devastating in its implications. The alderman's office had released a statement denying involvement in anything improper. The executive's publicist had not responded. The judge's name had appeared in one screenshot that had been shared 900 times before the platform flagged it. Roman's name had not yet appeared in the published pieces. It was there in the screenshots. But the outlets were being careful. Roman Kessler was the kind of name that required more verification than they currently had, because the kind of man Roman had lawyers who moved faster than news cycles. That would change. Evelyn could feel it the way you feel weather changing, not seeing it yet, but knowing the pressure was shifting. She put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. The cat redistributed its weight on her feet. She thought about the photograph she had sent from the fitting. The specific moment of it, standing in front of the mirror in the seamstress's studio on Michigan Avenue, the dress pinned and chalked and not quite finished, the afternoon light coming in at the angle that made her feel genuinely and uncomplicated, like something good was happening. She had picked up her phone and taken the photograph because she wanted to share that feeling with Roman. That was the entirety of her motivation. She had wanted him to see what she was seeing. She had sent it to someone who showed it to his lieutenants. The feeling in her chest when she'd realized that standing in the hallway with the sunroom voices drifting through the cracked door had been something she didn't have a clean name for even now. It wasn't just betrayal, because betrayal implied surprise, and somewhere below the surface of her conscious understanding, she wondered if some part of her had known for a long time that the man she'd constructed from Roman's behavior was not quite the man Roman was. She had just never let herself go to that room and look at what was in it. She was in it now. At 6:15 the next morning, Evelyn called her father. Grant Ashford picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he hadn't slept well, which meant he was already running some version of what she was about to tell him through whatever internal model he maintained for situations that required decisions. "I need to see you," she said, "before 9, alone." "Where the house?" "Your study." A pause. "I'll be there." She drove to her parents' house in Lincoln Park at 7, in Camille's car, because she was not going back to her building while the sedan was there. The house was tall and narrow and expensive in the quiet way that old Chicago money expressed itself, not showy, just permanent. The kind of structure that communicated without trying that the people inside it had always been here and intended to keep being here. Her father was in the study with coffee and no laptop, which meant he had cleared the hour deliberately. She sat down and told him everything. She did not edit it. She had spent 2 years editing things for the people she loved, because Roman had gradually, consistently, made her feel that her unedited experience of things was excessive, too much, too emotional, requiring management. She was done editing. Grant listened without interrupting. He sat with his coffee going cold and his hands very still on the desk, and the expression on his face cycling through things. She could only partially read anger, yes, and a specific kind of grief she recognized as a parent's grief, the kind that comes from realizing something was happening to your child that you were too close and too trusting to see. And something else. Something that looked around the jaw like the expression he wore when he was making the kind of decision that couldn't be unmade. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The boathouse," he said. "Silas believes that's where the primary archive is. And if it is, then we need to reach it before Gavin moves it. Silas says the window is very small." Her father stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her for a moment, which was not unusual. Grant Ashford processed things by moving, by looking at something other than the person he was talking to, by giving himself the physical space to think without performing thinking. "I have 3 men I trust completely," he said, "not organization men. My own." He turned around. "If we do this, we do it correctly. No improvisation. No one goes anywhere alone." "Dad, I'm not asking, Evelyn." His voice was quiet and completely certain. "You told me. Now I'm involved. That's how this works." She looked at him. He looked back. She nodded. The problem revealed itself at 10:40 that morning, and it came from the direction she had not been watching. Silas called her while she was at Camille's apartment, going through the information he'd sent: property records, marina diagrams, the partial documentation he'd been able to pull from his own access before Roman's people realized he'd used it. "There's a problem," he said, and his voice had a quality it hadn't had the night before, tighter, like something had been compressed in the hours since they'd met. "Tell me." "I went to verify the boathouse address this morning. Drove past it." He stopped. "There's already a car there. One of Roman's. That could mean anything." It could. "Except the car belongs to Gavin, not Roman. And Gavin shouldn't know that location is on anyone's radar." Another pause, longer. "Someone told him we were looking." The sentence arrived like something dropped from a height. Evelyn sat down. She was holding the property diagrams Silas had sent, and she set them on the table very carefully, like they were now something different than what they'd been 30 seconds ago. "Who knew about the boathouse? Besides you?" she asked. "You, your sister, your father, as of this morning." His voice was careful now. Clinical. The voice of a man running a calculation in real time and not liking the result. "And one other person I consulted last night to verify the property ownership. Contact I've used for years, a man named Decker. He runs title searches, property histories, stays outside the organization but does work for it. I've trusted him for a decade." "You trusted him last night," Evelyn said. "And this morning Gavin's car is at the boathouse." The silence between them had a specific quality now. Silas was doing what she was doing, walking back through the chain of information, looking for the link that had moved. "He must have gone to Gavin directly," Silas said quietly. He stopped. "There's a secondary problem. Tell me, if Decker told Gavin that someone was looking at the boathouse, Gavin is going to want to know who. And Decker knows my name." He stopped again. "Decker doesn't know yours. But he knows I've been in contact with someone connected to the wedding." Evelyn looked at the property diagrams on the table. The boathouse was marked in blue ink, Silas's careful compressed handwriting noting the access points, the dock layout, the secondary entrance from the marina road. "So Gavin knows you're moving against him," she said. "And he knows you're not moving alone." "Yes." "And the archive is now in the hands of someone who knows we're coming." "Yes." She looked at the diagrams for another moment. Then she turned them over so she wasn't looking at them, because looking at them felt like looking at a plan that no longer existed. "We need to meet," she said. "Now, bring everything you have." They met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park that Silas chose neutral ground, no connection to Roman's properties, the kind of place that was full of people at 11 in the morning and therefore safer than somewhere private. Evelyn arrived first. Camille was 2 minutes behind her. Silas came in at 11:15, looking like a man who had aged measurably since the night before. He put a manila folder on the table. "Before I show you this," he said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you last night." Evelyn looked at him. "Tell me." "The lawyer who died. The one holding the duplicate." He put his hands flat on the table. Not aggressive, more like a man steadying himself. "His name was Peter Vance. He was not a stranger to me. I'd worked with him for 6 years. He was the person who first told me the ledger existed, who first told me what Gavin was actually building, as opposed to what everyone believed he was building." "Okay," Evelyn said. "He came to me 8 months ago. Said he was worried. Said Gavin had started making inquiries about the duplicate's location testing, whether Vance would give it up, whether he could be pressured. Vance wasn't someone you pressured easily. He'd been holding secrets for powerful people for 30 years, and he was very clear on what his obligations were and weren't. But he was worried," Evelyn said. "He was worried," Silas confirmed. "He told me that if anything happened to him, there was a secondary measure. Something he'd arranged that Gavin didn't know about." He paused. "He didn't tell me what it was. He said the less I knew the better, and I agreed with him, which in retrospect was—" He stopped. "I should have pushed him on it. Vance died 11 weeks ago," Camille said. "What was the secondary measure?" Silas opened the manila folder. Inside was a photograph. A printed photograph, the kind produced by a physical printer, slightly warm-toned in the way of inkjet printing. It showed a woman Evelyn didn't recognize at first, mid-40s, dark hair, standing outside what appeared to be a building she also didn't recognize. The photograph had a date stamp in the corner. 13 weeks ago. Vance had a colleague, Silas said. Someone outside the legal world. A woman named Marianne Holt. She runs open-water swimming programs on the lake. Vance used to train with her years ago, before he got too busy. They stayed close. The name registered before Evelyn fully understood why. Vance gave Marianne a package, Silas said. Documentation. Copy of the core ledger entries, not the full archive, but the most significant ones. The ones that couldn't be denied. He paused. He told her to hold it and to give it to one specific person if he died. Evelyn looked at the photograph. The woman in it, Marianne Holt, open water swim programs, a name she had heard before, looked back at her from 13 weeks ago with an expression she couldn't read from a photograph. Who did he tell her to give it to? She said, though she had already started to understand. Silas looked at her. He'd followed your engagement to Roman, Silas said. He knew what the Ashford-Kessler marriage meant for Roman's standing in the city. He believed, and I think he was right, that anyone who was going to marry into Roman's world deserved to know what they were marrying into. The coffee shop hummed around them, the ordinary noise of a Tuesday morning. Someone ordering. Someone's laptop keys. He was going to give it to me, Evelyn said. He'd arranged it through Marianne, Silas said. A meeting. After the wedding. He was going to introduce you through her casual, through the swimming connection. Nothing that would look deliberate. He died before he could. 11 weeks ago, Silas confirmed. 2 weeks before your wedding. Evelyn sat with that. The shape of it. A lawyer she'd never met, who had spent 6 years holding secrets that included documentation of what Roman's network had done to the women inside it, who had made a careful private arrangement to get that documentation to the woman about to walk into the center of it. Marianne still has the package, Camille said. It wasn't a question. As far as I know, Silas said. She doesn't know what's in it. Vance told her to hold it until she was contacted, and he didn't contact her again, and she's been waiting. Evelyn looked at the photograph. And Gavin, she said. Does he know about Marianne? Silas closed the folder. That's what I don't know, he said. If Decker connected me to the Ashford wedding and told Gavin that. Gavin is smart enough to start pulling threads. And the thread from Vance to Marianne, he paused. It's not invisible, it's just not obvious. But Gavin makes his living finding threads that aren't obvious. How long do we have? Evelyn asked. If Gavin is already at the boathouse, he's either moving the archive or confirming it's still secure. Either way, he's going to turn his attention somewhere else within hours. And the somewhere else is going to be the question of who Vance trusted. Silas looked at her steadily. He is going to find Marianne. I don't know when, but he will find her. Evelyn put her hand on the folder. Where is she? She said. Training facility on the North Shore. She's there every morning between 6 and noon. Evelyn looked at Camille. Camille was already picking up her keys. Then Evelyn's phone buzzed. She looked at it. A message from a number she didn't recognize. No name. Just a photograph taken from a distance, slightly blurred, the kind of image produced by a long lens. It showed a woman walking toward a building, on what appeared to be a lakefront property. The woman was wearing a red jacket. Below the photograph, a single line of text. Queen has the ledger. Evelyn stared at the message. Her first thought was that it was Roman. Her second thought, arriving almost immediately behind the first, was that if Roman believed she had the ledger, the real ledger, the primary archive, he would not be sending anonymous photographs. He would be calling. He would be controlled and careful, and doing the thing he always did, which was managing the situation toward the outcome he needed. This was not Roman. This was Gavin. He thinks I have it, she said. Camille leaned over and looked at the photograph and the text and said nothing for a moment. Then the woman in the red jacket. That's not me, Evelyn said. Camille looked again. No, she said, it's not. They both looked at Silas. He was looking at the photograph with an expression that had moved well past careful into something that was simply afraid, which was, Evelyn thought, the most honest she'd seen him since they'd met. That's Marianne, he said. The coffee shop hummed. Someone laughed at a nearby table. The ordinary world doing its ordinary business all around them, indifferent to the fact that the photograph on Evelyn's phone meant that Gavin Rourke had already found the thread he was looking for. And the woman at the end of it didn't know she was being watched. And the package she was holding for a dead lawyer had just become the center of something that nobody, not Roman, not Gavin, not the men in that encrypted channel whose files lived in Gavin's archive, was going to walk away from easily. Evelyn stood up. "We need to get to her first," she said. "Right now, before he does." But even as she said it, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she recognized. Roman, not a call. Text. 4 words. Don't make this worse. She stared at it for 3 full seconds. 4 words. The tone of them not that threatening, not apologetic, just the flat directive of a man who had spent 2 years telling her, in various registers and through various framings, what the correct action was and what the consequences of the incorrect action would be. She put the phone in her pocket. "Let's go," she said. She didn't answer Roman. She would not answer Roman. And the decision not to answer the simple, deliberate choice to leave his directive sitting in her pocket unresponded to, while she walked out of a coffee shop in Wicker Park toward a situation she had not chosen and could not now unchoose, was the moment the last version of herself that Roman had shaped finally stopped. What walked out of that coffee shop was someone else. Someone who had not existed fully before this morning. She wasn't sure yet what that person was capable of. She was about to find out. The training facility was 40 minutes north in light traffic. Camille drove. Silas sat in the back with the manila folder open on his knees, going through what he had and telling them what they needed to know about Marianne Holt in the time they had to learn it. Marianne was 61. She had swum competitively until her mid-30s, then transitioned into coaching and open water programs. She was known in the lake swimming community as someone serious, not warm. In the conventional way, more the warmth of high standards applied without cruelty. She had been coaching women returning to physical activity after various life interruptions for 15 years. Her programs were not designed for performance athletes. They were designed for women who had lost their relationship with their own bodies and needed to rebuild it. Evelyn listened to this and felt something move through her that she didn't examine. Vance chose her specifically, she said. He trusted her, Silas said. And she has no connection to Roman's world. No reason for anyone to look at her. Except she's holding documentation that connects to Roman's world, Camille said. Yes, Silas said. Except that. They drove. The city thinned into the near-north suburbs, the lake appearing in gaps between buildings and then opening wide and flat and gray-green to the east. Evelyn looked at it. She had stopped swimming recreationally about 14 months into the relationship with Roman. She had told herself it was his schedule, their schedule, the way their lives had merged and certain things had been displaced. She had not examined the displacement too closely. Roman had opinions about the pool at her gym. He had opinions about lap swimming as exercise versus more targeted training. He had opinions about her relationship with that he expressed as care, and that she had received as care, and that she was only now watching the lake appear between buildings, beginning to understand as something different. He had not liked that swimming was something she did alone. Something internal. Something that existed between her body and the water, without any architecture he could stand inside. He had not said this directly, he had said it in 100 other ways over 14 months, until she had simply stopped going. She looked at the lake. She would go back. Not today. But she would go back. The training facility was a converted lakefront property, a low building, with large windows facing the water and an outdoor pool that connected to a gated section of lakeshore. There were 3 cars in the lot when Camille pulled in. A light was on inside the building. Evelyn got out first. Silas started to follow and she stopped him. "Stay here," she said. "Evelyn, you're connected to Roman's organization. She doesn't know that, but she might feel it." She looked at him steadily. "I'll talk to her. Camille comes with me. You stay with the car and you call me immediately if anyone else pulls into this lot." Silas looked like he wanted to argue. He was a man accustomed to being the one who managed information and therefore managed situations, and being told to sit in a car ran against his grain in a visible way. But he sat down. Evelyn and Camille walked to the building's entrance. The door was unlocked. They went in. The interior smelled like chlorine and rubber and old coffee from a machine in the corner. The floor was textured for wet feet. The windows looking out toward the lake were very large, and the water was visible through them, green-gray and choppy in the morning wind. A woman was standing beside the indoor pool with a clipboard, making notes. Red jacket, dark hair with gray running through it. The same woman from the photograph on Evelyn's phone. She looked up when they came in. She looked at Evelyn. And something happened in her expression that Evelyn didn't expect, not surprise, not alarm, but a kind of recognition. The specific look of someone who has been waiting for something and has just seen it arrive. "You're Evelyn Ashford," Marianne said. "Yes." Marianne put the clipboard down on the bench beside the pool. She looked at Camille briefly, then back at Evelyn. "Peter told me what you looked like," she said. "He described you." She said it simply, without sentimentality. "He said you'd come. He died before he could tell me," Evelyn said. "I know." Marianne's voice was steady, the voice of someone who had processed her grief about this and was now operating beyond it. "I've been waiting. I didn't know how to find you. He said not to reach out, that it had to come from your direction, or it would look connected in ways that would be dangerous." "It is connected," Evelyn said, "and it is dangerous." Marianne looked at her for a moment. "How dangerous?" "There's a man named Gavin Rourke." Evelyn kept her voice level. "He was photographing you this morning. He's looking for what Peter left with you." Marianne's expression didn't change dramatically, a small tightening around the eyes, a settling of the jaw, the physical vocabulary of someone absorbing bad news and organizing themselves around it. "How much time do I have?" she said. "I don't know." "Not much. The package is here," Marianne said. "Peter said to keep it close." "Not at my home." She looked toward the far end of the building, a door, storage, a room Evelyn couldn't see into. He said whoever came for it would need it immediately. That there wouldn't be time to arrange anything. She walked toward the door at the far end of the building. Evelyn followed. Camille stayed near the entrance, facing the window, watching the parking lot. The storage room was small and cold and smelled more strongly of chlorine. Equipment racks, buoys, a locked metal cabinet on the far wall that Marianne opened with a key from her jacket pocket. Inside the cabinet, behind a stack of timing equipment, was a sealed envelope. Thick. The kind of thickness that meant documents, not just paper. Marianne held it for a moment, without giving it over. Not reluctant, just deliberate. The gesture of someone completing an obligation they had held for wanted to complete 11 weeks and wanted to complete correctly. "Trusted you," she said. "He said you didn't know yet what you were walking into, but that you were the kind of person who would do something about it when you did." Evelyn looked at the envelope. A dead lawyer she'd never met had made a decision about her based on something she hadn't yet proven about herself. She reached out and took it. It was heavier than she expected. She was standing there, holding it, feeling the weight of 11 weeks, and a dead man's careful arrangement, and whatever was inside the envelope that Gavin Rourke was moving across the city to prevent anyone from reading, when Camille's voice came from the main room. "Evelyn." The tone of it was the one they'd used as children to signal something that required immediate movement. No explanation, just the name, and the name said everything. Evelyn put the envelope inside her jacket. She came back into the main room and looked through the large windows facing the parking lot. A black sedan had pulled in beside Camille's car. Not Roman's men. She knew Roman's vehicles. This was different, newer, darker, the plates obscured by the angle. The driver's door opened. The man who got out was not Gavin Rourke. He was younger, heavier, and he stood in the parking lot for a moment with the specific stillness of someone receiving instructions through an earpiece. Then he looked at the building. He looked directly at the window. Evelyn stepped back from the glass. "Side door," Marianne said from behind her. Not panicked, practical. The voice of a woman who ran programs for people rebuilding their relationship with difficult things and was therefore accustomed to finding the next step when the current path closed. There's a side door that opens to the path along the water. You can reach the road 2 properties north without going through the lot. Evelyn looked at her. Go, Marianne said. I'll deal with whoever that is. You don't have to. I've been holding that envelope for 11 weeks, Marianne said. I'd like to be done holding it. She looked at Evelyn steadily. Go, use the water path. Don't stop. Evelyn grabbed Camille's arm. They moved toward the side door, the one Marianne had indicated, half hidden behind the equipment racks, the kind of door that existed in every building and that most people never used because they had no reason to. Evelyn had a reason. She pushed the door open. The lake wind hit her immediately. Cold, direct, carrying the smell of open water and the distant sound of the water moving against the shore rocks below. She held the envelope against her chest and walked fast along the water path with Camille beside her. And behind them she could hear the front door of the building opening and a man's voice asking something she couldn't hear clearly. And Marianne's voice responding calm, unhurried. A woman who coached open water swimming and had been waiting for this moment and was handling it the only way she knew how. The path curved north along the shoreline. The sedan was behind them. The building was behind them. The lake was enormous and indifferent to her right, gray, green, and choppy, and the envelope inside her jacket pressed against her ribs with every step, and the plan she and Silas had made, the careful, reasonable plan to reach the archive before Gavin did, to approach this with enough information and enough support to be protected, was completely gone. Gavin already knew about Marianne. Gavin's man was already in that parking lot. The boathouse was already compromised. The contact who had betrayed them was already in Gavin's pocket. She had nothing left of the plan. What she had was the envelope. What she had was Camille beside her on a wind-scoured path along Lake Michigan, moving fast toward a road she couldn't see yet. What she had was her father's voice from this morning. If we do this, we do it correctly. She pulled out her phone and called Grant Ashford. He picked up on the first ring. Dad, she said, breathing hard, the wind eating the edges of her words. We need your men, right now. We need them at the North Shore training facility on Lakeview Drive, and we need them in the next 10 minutes. Pause. Not a long one. Where are you? Her father said. On the water path, north of the building. She looked over her shoulder. The path behind her was empty. For now, Gavin got there first. One of his men is inside. Another pause. Shorter. Keep moving, Grant said. I'll make the call. She kept moving. The lake hammered the rocks below the path with the steady, indifferent rhythm of water that had been doing this since long before any of them existed and would be doing it long after this morning was over and whatever it produced had been settled. She kept the envelope pressed against her chest. She kept moving. And somewhere behind her, in a training facility on the North Shore, Marianne Holt was talking to a man who worked for Gavin Rourke, and what she said to him and how long she could hold him in that conversation was the only remaining piece of the plan that had not yet collapsed, and it was not a piece Evelyn controlled. Grant Ashford's men arrived in 9 minutes. 2 vehicles, dark, unremarkable, the kind of cars that belonged to a man who had spent 40 years learning that visibility was a liability. They came from the north, which meant Grant had already had someone positioned in the area, which meant her father had been thinking several steps ahead of where she'd told him they were, which was either reassuring or said something uncomfortable about how well Grant Ashford understood the world Roman Kessler operated in. Evelyn didn't examine that right now. She filed it. The path met a residential street 2 properties north of the training facility. She and Camille came up off the lake path and onto the sidewalk, and one of Grant's cars was already there, engine running. A man she recognized from her father's security detail in the driver's seat. Another in the passenger seat she didn't recognize, but who had the specific quality of stillness that meant he was trained for something more than driving. They got in. The man in the lot, Evelyn said immediately. There's a woman inside Marianne Holt. She's holding him in conversation. We need someone to pull him out before he decides she's not useful anymore. The driver was already on a phone. She heard him relay the address and description, and the word extract used twice, in a way that meant something specific and operational. Camille was breathing hard. She didn't show fear the way most people did. She went quieter, which was the opposite of her natural state, and that inverse quiet was the tell. She sat beside Evelyn in the back seat and pressed her shoulder against her sister's, and didn't say anything. Evelyn pressed back. She had the envelope inside her jacket. She could feel it against her ribs with every breath, the specific pressure of it, the weight that a dead lawyer had arranged across 11 weeks of careful silence. She did not open it. Not yet. Not in a moving car with a situation still unresolved outside the windows. The driver pulled away from the curb and headed south. Away from the facility. Away from the black sedan in the lot. Her phone buzzed. "Silas, where are you?" he said. "In one of my father's cars. Heading south. The man in the... being handled. A beat. You got out. We got out." She looked at the lake sliding past the windows to the east. "You need to move. Right now. Gavin knows you were looking at the boathouse." If Decker told him that, he told him your name. Silas's voice was tight. "I'm already..." A sound she couldn't identify, something physical. "I'm already not where I was. Where are you going?" "Somewhere Gavin can't reach me for the next 6 hours." A pause. "Did you get it?" "Yes." Another pause, longer. "Open it," Silas said. "You need to know what's in it before anything else happens. Before anyone else tells you what it means or what to do with it." He hung up. She opened it in the car, on the way back toward the city, while Grant's driver navigated the shoreline road, and Camille sat beside her, and the lake light came through the windows at the angle of mid-morning. Inside the sealed envelope was a second envelope smaller, marked in Peter Vance's handwriting with a date 13 weeks ago, and inside that were 37 pages. Not originals. High-quality photocopies, the kind produced by equipment that rendered detail clearly. Bank records. Photographs with metadata printed in the margins. 2 notarized affidavits, one from a man Evelyn didn't recognize, one from a man she did, an alderman whose name had appeared twice in the published screenshots, and who had, apparently, at some point before his exposure, made the calculation that getting ahead of it was better than being buried by it. A set of transaction records with dates running back 4 years. And a handwritten index, 2 pages, in Vance's compressed, careful handwriting, cross-referencing each document with a corresponding entry number in the full archive. Evelyn read all of it. It took 25 minutes. She read carefully and without rushing, and Camille read alongside her, and neither of them spoke. When they finished, Evelyn set the pages on her knee and looked out the window. The lake was there. It was always there. This morning, in every direction, she looked the same water she'd grown up beside, the same gray-green color that meant depth and cold and distance, the same lake that had been the backdrop of her wedding that wasn't, and the water path she'd run along 40 minutes ago, with an envelope pressed to her ribs. She thought about Roman. She thought about the transaction records, the dates, the amounts, the routing, the names. She thought about the affidavit from the alderman, the specific language of it, a sound like green wood splitting, the careful accounting of what had been asked and what had been given, and what the arrangement between Gavin's information empire and the political infrastructure of the city actually looked like when you wrote it down clearly. She had known, in the abstract, that Roman's world was built on things that weren't legal. She had known this the way you know things you have accepted without examining as background, as context, as the agreed-upon framework that everyone in a certain world moves through without naming aloud. She had told herself it was separate from her, from them, from the version of Roman that existed in their private life together. She looked at the transaction records again. His name was on 6 of them. Not Gavin's name, not a pseudonym. Roman Kessler's actual name, attached to actual numbers, in documentation that a lawyer had apparently considered solid enough to stake the entire edifice of his insurance arrangement on. He wasn't on the periphery of this, Camille said quietly. She was looking at the same page. No, Evelyn said. He was the center. Yes. Camille looked out her own window. Okay, she said. And the way she said it was not the same as the way she'd said it in the stairwell at the hotel yesterday. That okay had been a woman accepting facts and preparing to move. This okay was different. This was smaller, more private. The okay of someone who had disliked Roman Kessler for 2 years on instinct and was now staring at the documentation of why the instinct was right and finding that being right was not in any way satisfying. Evelyn put the pages back in the envelope, sealed it. Put it back inside her jacket, she called her father. I read it, she said. All of it? All of it. Another pause. She could hear him thinking the specific quality of her father's silences, which were not empty, but full of something she had learned to read as a child without being able to name it. Come home, he said. The next 3 hours happened in Grant Ashford's study with the door locked, and 4 people in the room: Grant, Evelyn, Camille, and a woman named Hester Kwan, who had been Grant's attorney for 18 years, and who arrived 20 minutes after Evelyn with a briefcase, and the expression of a person who had received a phone call she'd been expecting for longer than she'd like to admit. Hester read the 37 pages in 14 minutes, which suggested she was either the fastest reader Evelyn had ever encountered, or she was already familiar with the shape of what she was reading. When she finished, she set the pages on Grant's desk and put her hands flat beside them and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. This is enough, she said. Enough for what? Camille said. Enough for multiple federal investigations. Enough to void every political arrangement in those transaction records. Enough to expose the full scope of the network. She paused. Enough to put Gavin Rourke in a position where the ledger becomes a liability rather than an asset where anyone who was part of that system has more to gain from cooperating with investigators than from protecting each other. Roman, Evelyn said. Hester looked at her. Roman is in 6 of those transactions by name. I know. He'll have lawyers who are very good at their jobs. This won't be simple or fast. Hester picked up one of the pages. But with the full archive, which this index references, the case becomes significantly harder to dismantle. The full archive is in the boathouse, Evelyn said. Or it was this morning. Gavin may have moved it by now. Then we need it before he does, Grant said. The room was quiet for a moment. Dad, Evelyn said carefully, the boathouse is Roman's property. Gavin's men are there. This isn't something Hester can walk into with a briefcase. No, Grant said it isn't. He looked at her in the way he'd looked at her across the desk that morning directly, with the specific weight of a man who had spent 4 decades making decisions that cost him things, and had developed in that time the capacity to make them anyway. I have a relationship with a federal investigator, he said. Someone I've worked with on legitimate business matters for 8 years. Someone who, when I show them this index, will understand what they're looking at. He paused. But that takes time, and if Gavin moves the archive tonight, the window closes. So we need the boathouse first, Camille said. Yes. Which means tonight, Evelyn said. Yes. She looked at the desk. At the 37 pages lying there, in Vance's careful arrangement. At the index in his handwriting, the 2-page cross-reference that connected this fragment to the full archive, sitting in a boathouse on Chicago Harbor, in the hands of a man who had spent years building a machine for controlling powerful people and had now lost control of it. Then we go tonight, she said. Silas called at 4:15 with information she hadn't expected. Gavin and Roman are already at the boathouse, he said. Together. They were seen arriving separately, Gavin first, Roman 40 minutes later. They're not there to coordinate. They're there because they're on opposite sides of something, and the boathouse is where they chose to have that conversation. Evelyn was in the room that had been her childhood bedroom, which her parents had contained with the particular stubbornness of people who weren't ready to concede that a chapter was fully over. She was sitting on the edge of the bed looking at her phone when Silas called, and she stood up when he told her this. Opposite sides of what? She said. Gavin built the ledger, Silas said. Roman benefited from it. But in the last 8 months since Roman found out the full scope, their arrangement has been deteriorating. Roman understands that Gavin's archive contains material that could destroy him personally. Not just professionally, destroy him in the specific way that can't be managed or survived. A pause. He's been trying to find a way to access the archive and remove his own entries. Gavin won't allow it. So Roman went to the boathouse to take it, Evelyn said, or to force Gavin to give him his files, or to reach some agreement that protects him. I don't know the specific play. Silas stopped. What I know is that two men with competing interests in a very dangerous set of documents are in the same building tonight. And that situation doesn't stay stable for long. She thought about this. About the specific physics of two men like Roman and Gavin in the same room with something they both needed and neither could fully control. How many men does Gavin have there? She said. I've confirmed 3. Roman may have brought 1 or 2 of his own. A pause. Your father's people, how many? 4, she said. Plus whoever he can add by tonight. It's not enough for a confrontation, Silas said. But it might be enough to be present, to be witnesses, to hold a perimeter while the situation inside resolves itself. You think they'll resolve it themselves, she said. I think men like Roman and Gavin, in a room with no audience, tend to either reach an agreement or make a mistake. Either way, the result creates an opening. He paused again. Come in after the opening, not before. She stood at the window of her childhood bedroom and looked at the Lincoln Park street below, a tree-lined block she had ridden bikes on, walked home from school on, sat on the front steps of at midnight when she was 17, and the world seemed very large in a way that felt exciting rather than threatening. She looked at it and felt very far from 17. Tonight, she said. What time after 10? The Marina Road is less monitored after 10. A beat. I'll meet you there, Silas. She stopped him before he could hang up. The man Gavin sent to the training facility. Marianne. She's fine, Silas said. Your father's men extracted the situation. Gavin's man left without anything, she exhaled. One more thing, Silas said. The message you got. The photograph of Marianne. The Queen has the ledger. He paused. I've been thinking about who sent that. Wasn't meant to threaten you. No, it was meant to tell you something. About how Gavin sees you. His voice was careful. He called you the Queen. Not Roman's woman. Not the bride. Queen. A beat. That's not an insult. That's a designation. In Gavin's system, everyone has a classification. He classified you as someone with power in this situation. He was wrong, she said. I didn't have the archive. He wasn't entirely wrong, Silas said, and hung up. They arrived at the marina at 10:40. Grant's vehicles, 3 of them now, he'd added 1 in the hours between afternoon and night, moved through the Marina Road with their lights on standard, nothing to indicate urgency or purpose. The road was quiet. Residential properties on one side, water access on the other, the specific silence of a lake-adjacent neighborhood after 10 p.m. when the summer people were inside and the boats were tied up. And the only sound was the water and the wind working against each other. The boathouse was at the far end of a private dock. It was larger than the word suggested, a full structure, enclosed, with an interior that could accommodate 2 or 3 vessels and a second-floor area that Roman had used, Silas had told them, as a private meeting space. No windows facing the Marina Road, a single dock entrance facing the lake and a land entrance from the private property path. Grant's men positioned on the property perimeter without being told. Twice, these were people who understood deployment without requiring the geometry of it explained. Evelyn was aware of them moving to their positions in the dark, the way you're aware of things at the edge of your vision, present without being fully visible. Silas was already there. He materialized from the shadow near the property gate when their vehicle stopped, which told her he'd arrived well ahead of them and had been watching the building. They're still inside, he said quietly. Both of them. Whatever conversation they're having, it hasn't finished. His men, Grant said. 2 of Gavin's are on the dock. 1 more inside. Roman came alone. Grant processed this without reacting. Roman came alone, he repeated. Yes. That's either very confident or very desperate, Grant said. Both, Silas said. In my experience with Roman, those aren't different things. They stood in the dark at the edge of the property. The lake was loud tonight. The wind had come up in the last hour, and the water was moving against the dock pilings with a rhythmic force that covered ambient sound and made it harder to hear anything from inside the building. Rain was coming. Evelyn could smell it in the wind, that specific charged smell that arrives 20 minutes before the first drop. She looked at the boathouse. She thought about 37 pages. A sound like green careful index. About a dead lawyer's careful index. Sitting inside that building, 4 years of documentation, the financial architecture of a corrupt network, the names of every man who had participated in Gavin's system, and believed that their participation was protected by the same architecture that made it possible. The sound from inside the boathouse shifted. Not loud or different. The quality of it changed the way the quality of silence changes when something is about to happen inside it. Then the land entrance door opened. Roman came out first. He was not composed. That was the first thing she registered. Roman Kessler, who had maintained the specific performance of composure for every moment she had ever witnessed under pressure, was not composed. His jacket was open. His tie was gone. He had the look of a man who had just come through something physical or something very close to it, and he stood on the dock path in the dark, with his chest moving too fast and his hands loose at his sides. He didn't see them immediately. The instinctive look of a man seeking open space, and then he turned and saw Grant's vehicle and the people standing beside it, and went completely still. His eyes found Evelyn. Something moved through his face that she couldn't name from this distance in this light. Not surprise exactly. More like a man arriving at the conclusion of a calculation he had been running for the last 24 hours and finding that the answer was exactly as bad as his worst estimate. "Evelyn," he said, his voice carried across the wind. It had nothing of the controlled warmth she had known for 2 years. It was simply his voice, stripped of everything he'd layered onto it, and it sounded different than she expected. Smaller, more ordinary, the voice of a man rather than a performance of one. She took a step forward. "Roman," she said. Then Gavin Rourke came through the door behind him. Gavin was not like Roman, physically shorter, more compact, the kind of build that didn't announce itself. He was 60 years old and had the specific stillness of someone who had operated in dangerous proximity to violent people for decades without ever being the one who threw the first punch. He moved with the economy of a man who had never needed to waste motion to establish authority, because authority for Gavin had never come from physicality. It had always come from what he knew. He looked at the assembled group on the property path with the specific expression of a man doing a rapid inventory of variables. His eyes moved efficiently. Grant, Evelyn, Camille, Silas, the positions of Grant's men at the perimeter. Cataloging, calculating. Then his eyes stopped on Silas. "There he is," Gavin said. His voice was flat, no heat in it, which was somehow worse than heat would have been. 11 years, he said. "And you went to her?" Silas didn't answer. He held Gavin's gaze without moving, the specific stillness of a man who had known this confrontation was coming and had decided what he would look like during it. "Package Vance left," Gavin said. He wasn't asking. He was confirming the way a man confirms things he already knows to an audience he wants to establish his knowledge for. "You helped her get to Marianne?" "Yes," Silas said. "You've had the index for." Gavin stopped. He looked at Evelyn. "How long have you had it?" "Long enough," Evelyn said. The wind came harder off the lake. The first drops of rain arrived not heavy yet, just a preliminary scattering, the announcement of weather rather than weather itself. Roman was standing between them and Gavin. Not deliberately, he had come out the door first and found himself in the geometry of the situation, without choosing it. He looked at Gavin. He looked at Evelyn. He was the specific expression of a man who had spent his entire adult life controlling the rooms he was in, and had just found himself in a room he couldn't control, and the experience was visibly unfamiliar. "The archive," Evelyn said. She looked at Gavin. "Where is it?" "In the building," Gavin said. "Where it belongs." "It belongs with investigators," she said. "Which is where it's going." Gavin looked at her with something that wasn't quite respect, but occupied the same space the particular look he had put in that text message, the assessment that had classified her as a queen in his internal taxonomy. She could see him revising his estimates in real time, recalculating the distance between the woman he had expected to deal with and the one standing in front of him. "You don't understand what's in that archive," he said. "You have 37 pages. Fragments. What's inside is not fragments." "I know what's in it," she said. "I have the index." Something shifted in Gavin's expression. You have the index, he repeated. Every entry, every name, every document cross-referenced. She held his gaze. Hester Kwan has a copy of the index. My father's attorney. If anything happens to the archive tonight, if it moves, if it's destroyed, the index tells investigators exactly what to look for and where to find the backups that Vance built into the system. That landed. She watched it land, watched Gavin absorb the information and run it through whatever internal architecture he used to assess situations. Watched his face do the thing that faces do when someone who was not supposed to know a thing turns out to know it. Vance built backups, Gavin said quietly. He was a careful lawyer, Evelyn said. The rain came harder. Real rain. Now. Not scattering, the kind that soaks through in minutes. That makes the dock slick and the air thick and everything louder because of the percussion of it. Roman spoke. Gavin. His voice was careful. The performance was partially back. Not the warmth, but the control. This is over. Gavin looked at him. The look between them had the specific charge of two men who had been in the same building for the last several-hour conversation that had almost certainly already said most of what there was to say. Is it? Gavin said. She has the index. Her father has lawyers. The investigation. The investigation you've spent 4 months trying to prevent, Gavin said. The investigation you came here tonight to prevent. Don't perform for me right now, Roman. There's no audience for that. Roman's jaw tightened. There's an audience, Gavin said. He gestured slightly toward Evelyn. She's been your audience for 2 years. How'd that work out? The rain was loud on the dock, loud on the roof of the boathouse, loud on the surface of the water below the pilings. Evelyn stood in it and felt her hair go flat and her jacket soak through and the envelope inside her jacket press against her ribs, and she did not move back from the rain because stepping back from it would have been stepping back from the moment, and she was not stepping back from anything tonight. Roman turned to her, and she saw it clearly for the first time, with nothing between her and the seeing of it, the thing that had always been behind the performance. Not malice, exactly. Something more complicated, and in some ways worse. A man who had organized the world according to what he needed from it, who had organized her according to what he needed from her, and who had confused that organization for love because it had been easier than examining the difference. He looked at her with the expression of a man who wanted to say something and had nothing left to say it with. Evelyn, he said. Don't, she said. Stopped. Whatever you were going to say, she said. Don't. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked away, toward the lake, that same instinctive look toward open space, toward somewhere that wasn't this dock, this rain, this accumulated wreckage of the last 24 hours. Gavin had been watching this exchange. She ended your wedding, he said to Roman quietly, in front of everyone you needed to impress. And you're still looking at her like she's the problem. Gavin, Roman said. You shared her photograph with me, Gavin said. I want to be clear about that. Tonight, in front of her. You shared it, and you laughed when we talked about it, and you called it nothing when she confronted you. I want that said clearly. Why, Roman said. His voice had gone hard. Because I kept records, Gavin said. I keep records of everything. And I want the record to include that moment. That you could not even now say it directly to her face. Roman stared at him. Evelyn looked at Gavin. There was something in this she hadn't anticipated, something that complicated the simple shape of the situation. Gavin Rourke was not a good man. The archive existed because of what he was and what he had built and what he had done with the information he accumulated. But in this moment, on this rain-soaked dock, he was saying something true. Saying it precisely and without the kind of management Roman applied to everything. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it. The archive, she said to Gavin. I need it. Why would I give it to you, he said. If you hand it to investigators, my name is in it. Your name is in Vance's index, she said. Either way, your name is in it. Question is, whether you're the man who handed the archive over, or the man who tried to keep it hidden and failed. Gavin looked at her for a long time. The rain fell between them. And if I give it to you, he said, what happens to Roman? That's not my decision, she said. You could make it your decision. You're the one holding the index. He paused. You could make an arrangement. No, she said.
You could know.
She kept her voice steady. The rain was in her eyes now, running down her face, and she didn't wipe it away. That's not what I'm here for. I'm not making arrangements for Roman. I'm not protecting him. I'm not negotiating his exposure in exchange for the archive. She looked at Gavin clearly. He made his decisions. They're in those records. That's where they belong. Gavin was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, when Roman first showed me your file before you were a file, when you were just a name, I thought you were going to be a problem for him. I wasn't a file, she said. Everyone was a file, he said. Not defensively, simply. The matter-of-fact statement of a man who organized his world that way and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. But yours was different. Not because of anything Roman entered. Because of what he didn't. What do you mean? He didn't write down your weaknesses. Gavin looked at her with the clinical attention of someone who had spent decades reading people and was reading her now. Every other person in that system, I had weaknesses. Fears. The specific places where a person could be leveraged. Roman logged them. For you, he logged your schedule, your body, your habits. But not your weaknesses. A pause, because he didn't see them. Or didn't want to. She stood in the rain with that. I'm not a file, she said again. Quieter. No, Gavin said. You're not. Then Roman moved, not toward Evelyn. Not toward Gavin. He moved toward the boathouse door, the land entrance, the one they'd both come through, and it was fast enough, and purposeful enough, that Grant's men on the perimeter shifted immediately. One of them closing toward the dock, with the particular movement of someone trained to intercept. But it wasn't the door Roman reached for. It was Gavin. He grabbed Gavin's jacket with both hands, not a punch, not a shove, something more primitive than either, the grab of a man who had run out of words and was trying to close a distance he couldn't close any other way. And Gavin, who was shorter and older and had never in his life relied on his body for anything, twisted away with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades knowing exactly where the exits were. Roman, Grant said. His voice had the specific authority of a man who had used it to stop things before. Enough. Roman turned. He was breathing hard. Standing in the rain on the dock with his jacket pulled loose from Gavin's escape, and his chest moving and his face showing, for the first time in the 2 years she had known him. Something that didn't have a performance over it. Something raw and ugly and real. This is your fault, he said. She assumed for one moment he meant Gavin. Then she realized he was looking at her. Roman Camille started. This was going to be contained, he said. His voice was rough with rain, and something else, all of it. Channel, the archive, the whole thing, it was going to be handled. I had a plan to handle it, and then he stopped. Breathed. You took that microphone. Evelyn looked at him. You took that microphone, he said again. In front of everyone I have ever, he stopped again. Something working hard behind his eyes. You had no idea what you were setting off. You had no idea what you were showing me, she said. Through that door. It was one photograph, Roman. She took one step toward him. The rain was between them, and the dock was slick, and the lake was audible below, and behind all of it, and she stood in all of it, and looked at him clearly. I heard you laugh. He went still. Not about the photograph, she said. The photograph was the evidence. But I heard you laugh, and I understood what the laugh meant. I understood the relationship between that laugh and 2 years of telling me what to eat and how to train, and which clothes showed the right amount of discipline, and when I was being appropriately attractive and when I was being excessive. Kept her voice steady, and it was costing her, but she paid it. I understood that the laugh meant you had never been looking at me. You had been looking at something you were managing. The dock was very quiet except for the rain. I never wanted to manage you, Roman said. And the thing in his voice was complicated, she could hear it, even now. The specific register of a man who believed what he was saying, and was also, at the same time, the reason it wasn't true. I know, she said. That's the part that took me a long time to understand. You didn't decide to manage me. You just don't know how to be with someone without doing it. She paused. That's not something I could fix. That's not something ending the wedding was going to fix. Roman looked at her. In the rain, in the dark, on a dock above Lake Michigan, with Grant's men at the perimeter, and Gavin standing 3 feet away, and Silas somewhere behind her, and Camille's shoulder against hers in all of that. Roman Kessler looked at Evelyn Ashford with the expression of a man arriving, finally, at a room he had been avoiding for a very long time, and finding that it was exactly as bad as he had known it would be. "Archive," he said, to no one in particular. "Just take it. Take all of it." Gavin looked at him. "Roman," Gavin said carefully. "Take it," Roman said again, louder. The roughness in his voice had moved into something that wasn't quite breaking, but was very close to it. "Whatever you're going to do with it. Whatever, investigators. Whatever, take it." "I'm done." He walked off the dock, not fast, not dramatically. Just the walk of a man who had made a decision and was moving through it. He walked past Grant's men at the perimeter. They let him pass, reading Grant's expression correctly, and down the Marina Road toward wherever he'd left his car, and the rain closed around him, and then he was gone. Gavin stood on the dock in the rain and looked at the space where Roman had been. Then he looked at Evelyn. "The archive is in the lower storage," he said. "There's a combination. I'll give it to you." He paused. "All of it. Intact." Another pause. "I'm going to need to call my own lawyer." "That's your right," Evelyn said. Gavin looked at her for a moment longer. The cataloging expression again, the inventory of who she was and how she was different from what he had expected and what that meant for his calculations. "Peter Vance was right about you," he said. She didn't answer that. Gavin turned and went back into the boathouse. Grant came to stand beside Evelyn. He didn't touch her. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the rain, and the cold, the specific presence of a parent beside a child who is no longer a child, which was a different kind of presence than any other. "You okay?" he said quietly. She thought about it honestly. "No," she said, "but I will be." The rain fell on Lake Michigan. The dock was slick, and the wind was cold. And somewhere at the end of the Marina Road, a set of headlights came on and moved away, and Gavin Rourke was in the boathouse giving a combination to a storage unit that contained 4 years of evidence, and Silas was somewhere behind her managing his own particular accounting of what the night had cost him. And Camille was pressed against her side the way she had been since they were children, and something was too large to stand in alone. Evelyn stood at the edge of the dock and looked at the lake. The water was very dark. She had grown up beside it, swum in it since she was 9. It had been the backdrop of a wedding that had ended before it started. It had been the path she'd run along in the rain with an envelope pressed to her ribs. It was here now, loud and cold and indifferent and enormous, doing what it always did. Gavin's voice came from inside the boathouse. She turned and walked toward the door, and her father walked beside her, and the rain fell on both of them equally, and the archive was waiting inside in the dark, and she was going in to get it. The archive was 4 boxes. That was the first thing that surprised her, not the content, not the scope, but the physical fact of it. 4 standard file boxes, the kind you bought at any office supply store, stacked in the lower storage of a boathouse on Chicago Harbor. She had expected something more deliberately formidable, something that matched the weight it carried. Instead, there were 4 cardboard boxes with handwritten labels in Gavin's compressed script, sitting on metal shelving beside boat equipment and coiled rope and a rusted anchor that had probably not been used in years. Gavin gave her the combination, stood back while Grant's men opened the storage unit and identified the boxes and confirmed they were intact. He did this with the specific posture of a man who has made a decision and is now watching it execute, which is a different posture from the one where a man is still deciding. The deciding was done. What was left was the cost of it, which Gavin appeared to be accounting for in real time, internally, without letting it reach his face. "All 4, Evelyn said. "All 4, Gavin confirmed. One of Grant's men lifted the first box. It was heavier than it looked. Evelyn picked up the second one herself. She didn't know why, some instinct toward participation, toward not standing back while other people carried the thing she had come here to get. The cardboard was slightly damp from the harbor air and the rain that had come through the door, and the box was dense in her arms with the weight of paper, and she carried it out of the storage unit and across the boathouse floor and through the door into the wet night. She put it in the back of Grant's vehicle herself. Then she went back for the third. Grant watched her do this without commenting, which was the right call. Camille watched from the vehicle with the window cracked, rain on her face, also without commenting. Silas helped with the fourth box, and they carried it together, and he looked at her once, briefly, in the way of someone confirming that the person beside him is still standing, and she gave him a small nod that confirmed it. Then the boxes were in the vehicle, and Gavin was on his phone calling his lawyer. And Grant's men were holding the perimeter, and the rain was still falling on the harbor, and it was 11:47. Night, and the thing she had come here to do was done. She stood beside the vehicle with her hand on the door and felt for a moment the full weight of the last 36 hours landing on her at once. Not dramatically. More the way exhaustion arrives when the thing demanding your adrenaline finally stops, demandiness, a sudden a dropping of whatever internal architecture had been holding her upright through the operational logic of the day. She got in the vehicle. She did not cry. Not because she was suppressing it. She had decided, sometime in the last 2 days, to stop suppressing things, but because what she felt was not reducible to crying. It was larger and more textured than that. It was grief and relief, and a specific cold anger that had burned down to embers now, and exhaustion, and underneath all of it, something she couldn't name yet, but that felt, tentatively, like the first cellular evidence of something indifferent beginning. Grant got in beside her. The vehicle pulled out of the Marina Road. The lake disappeared behind them. Hester Kwan was waiting at Grant's house when they arrived at 12:30. She had coffee made and a legal pad open on the kitchen table, and the expression of a woman been awake for several hours, being productive about something, which was her natural state in a crisis. She looked at the 4 boxes that Grant's men brought through the door and sat on the kitchen floor and said nothing for a moment, then picked up her pen. "I need 2 hours with these tonight," she said, "to confirm scope and start building the referral documentation. After that, it goes to the federal contact." She looked at Grant. "I want to be the one making that call. First thing in the morning. Before anyone in Roman's organization has the chance to get ahead of this." "Do it," Grant said. Hester looked at Evelyn. "Are you all right?" "I need to sleep," Evelyn said. "Yes," Hester said. "You do." She said it practically, not maternally, the assessment of someone who needed Evelyn functional in the coming days, and was noting that functionality required sleep. "Everything from this point is mine and Grant's. You've done what needed to be done." Evelyn looked at the 4 boxes on the kitchen floor. Compressed handwriting on the labels. The cardboard still slightly damp from the harbor. Then she went upstairs. She slept in her childhood bedroom for 9 hours without dreaming, which was the deepest sleep she had managed in longer than she could accurately track. The federal contact was a woman named Dana Forsyth, and the call happened at 7:15 the next morning, before Evelyn was fully awake. She heard it through the wall, her father's voice, measured and precise, and occasionally Hester's, and the sound of a conversation moving through phases she couldn't quite hear the details of. She lay in the bed in the gray morning light and listened to the sound of it without trying to make out the words, the way you listen to weather when you can't see outside, reading the register rather than the content. It sounded like something was being handed over. It sounded like the thing had been handed over correctly. She got up at 8 and showered and came downstairs and found Grant at the kitchen table with the legal pad, and 3 of the 4 boxes opened, their contents partially reorganized into the categorization system Hester had apparently established overnight. The 4th box was on the kitchen counter, sealed with a strip of tape Hester had added and labeled in her own handwriting. "Federal preservation," Grant said, following her eyes to the 4th box. "Hester's keeping that one intact and unhandled. Chain of custody." She called Forsyth? "This morning. Forsyth is already briefed. Process is formal now." He looked at her steadily. "It's out of our hands," which is exactly where it should be. Evelyn poured coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the 4th box and drank the coffee and thought about what "out of our hands" actually meant, the specific texture of it, after 36 hours of keeping everything very much in their hands. The way relinquishment and relief could occupy the same moment without being the same feeling. Roman, she said. Roman was seen at his residence at 6 a.m. by Forsyth's people, Grant said. He hasn't moved. His lawyers have been contacted. The process with him will take time, these things always do. He paused. The documentation in those boxes is specific. Hester said it's the most organized case file she's seen come from a non-prosecutorial source. That was Gavin, Evelyn said. Yes, Grant said. Gavin built a very thorough archive. She looked at her coffee. He's going to try to use that as leverage. His cooperation with the archive against his own exposure. Probably. That negotiation is between his lawyers and Forsyth. Grant's voice was careful. It's not nothing. Gavin's cooperation and the archive together are more useful to an investigation than the archive alone. He may get something for it, he paused. Roman won't. She looked at him. Roman's name is on 6 transactions, in a way that isn't negotiable, Grant said. Quietly, without satisfaction, just the flat delivery of a fact. Hester was clear about that. Whatever Roman's lawyers argue, those 6 entries are going to be very difficult to argue away. Evelyn nodded. She drank her coffee. She did not feel the thing she had perhaps expected to feel, the clean satisfaction of a wrong being made right, the narrative completion of consequence arriving. What she felt was more specific and less gratifying than that, the particular weight of watching a person's life restructure around a set of decisions they had made when they believed they were safe from consequence, and understanding that the restructuring was not justice exactly, but was the closest available approximation of it, and that closest available approximations were what the actual world offered instead of the clean version. She had always known this. She had just spent 2 years inside a version of reality that had been carefully managed to feel more resolved than it was. Dad, she said. Yes, did you know? Before yesterday. She looked at him. About the scope of what Roman's organization was. Grant looked at his coffee cup. He did this for a moment longer than a simple no would have required. I knew Roman's organization involved things. I didn't examine closely, he said. I made a choice not to examine them closely because the alliance was advantageous to the family and because I told myself there was a meaningful distinction between Roman's business and my own. He looked up. There isn't a meaningful distinction. I know that now. You knew before now, she said. Yes, he said, I did. She looked at him. He looked back. I'm not going to do anything with that right now, she said. But I needed to say it. I know, he said. I needed to hear it. They sat in the kitchen with their coffee, in the morning light, father and daughter, in the house where she had grown up. And the conversation they were not quite having, the one about what it had meant for Grant to deliver her to a situation he had chosen not to fully examine. The one about all the things that qualified as being handed something by someone who loved you and was also using you existed in the space between them clearly enough that it did not need to be fully spoken. It would need to be spoken eventually, just not today. Silas came to see her 4 days later. She was back in her own apartment. By then the black sedan had not returned after the night at the boathouse. And she understood why. Salps, because the men who had placed it there were now managing problems considerably larger than surveillance of a woman who had walked away from a wedding. She had gone back to her apartment and stood in the middle of it and looked at the space she had inhabited for 3 years and tried to find the version of herself that had lived here before Roman had reorganized it, and found that she couldn't find that version exactly, but could find something that was moving in its direction. She had rearranged the furniture in the living room. For no strategic reason, just because the arrangement had been Roman's suggestion and she wanted something different. Silas knocked at 7 in the evening, which she had told him to do. He came in and sat at the kitchen table with his jacket still on, which was his habit, and she made tea because she was not drinking alcohol this week, and they sat across from each other. I'm cooperating with Forsyth's people, he said. Formally, as of this morning, I know. Hester told me. I want you to know directly. He looked at his tea. 11 years. There are things I was part of, by proximity and by silence, that I cannot fully separate myself from. I'm not going to try. He looked up. I'm going to tell them everything I know, including the things that make my own position difficult. Okay, she said. I need you to know I'm not doing it to help myself. The lawyers tell me it probably will, to some degree. But that's not, he stopped, reorganized. I'm doing it because Vance asked me to, years ago, and I said I would, and then I didn't. Because I was afraid of what it would cost me. He paused. Going to cost me things. I've been calculating that for 4 days, and I've finished calculating. She looked at him. At the quality of him, the specific exhaustion of a man who had spent 11 years carefully maintaining a position just close enough to power to be useful and just far enough to feel clean, and who had finally lost the ability to maintain that distance. Peter Vance trusted you, she said. He trusted me to do something I didn't do until you walked out of that hotel terrace and made it impossible not to. He picked up his tea. You did in one morning what I spent 11 years telling myself I was building toward. I didn't know what I was building toward, she said. I just couldn't stand there anymore. That's usually how it works, he said. They drank their tea. The apartment was quiet. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always did in the evening traffic and voices and the particular urban texture of a city that didn't stop for anyone's crisis, which was, she had decided, not a comfort exactly, but a kind of companionship. What happens to Gavin, she said. His lawyers are in negotiation. He has significant exposure, but also significant cooperation value. They'll reach something. Silas set down his cup. He's not going to be comfortable. He's going to lose most of what he spent 40 years building. The archive was his power and his protection simultaneously, and giving it up ended both. He didn't have to give it up, she said. No, Silas agreed. Could have fought. He had men there. He could have made the night considerably worse. He paused. He didn't. She thought about that. About Gavin on the dock in the rain, doing the inventory, making his calculation, deciding, finally, that whatever leverage the archive had ever given him was finished, that the Queen had the index and the lawyer's backups existed, and the geometry of the situation had closed around him in a way that made resistance more expensive than surrender. She thought about what he had said to her. Roman didn't write down your weaknesses. She did not know what to do with Gavin Rourke. He was not a good man, and she did not feel gratitude toward him, and she did not forgive him for the system he had built, which had processed her as a file for 2 years. But he had said something true on that dock, and he had given her the boxes, and the interactions between those two facts was more complicated than she had words for yet. Some things she was learning didn't have words yet. You carried them until the words arrived. Roman's lawyers filed their first challenge 6 weeks after the night at the boathouse. Hester called Evelyn on a Tuesday morning to tell her, in the flat, precise voice she used for legal updates, that the challenge was procedural and argument, about the circumstances of the archive's acquisition, about chain of custody, about whether the manner in which the evidence had been obtained was legally sustainable. Hester said, exactly what she had expected Roman's lawyers to file first, and she had prepared for it, and it would not succeed. How confident, Evelyn said. Very, Hester said. The archive includes self-generated records, documents Roman created or signed or authorized. The acquisition argument fails against self-generated records. How long? The process is the process, Hester said. But the architecture of the case is solid. Your part is done, Evelyn. You gave us what we needed. Now it moves through the system at the speed the system moves. Evelyn looked out her apartment window. The lake was visible from this angle, a thin strip of it between buildings, gray-blue in the October morning. Okay, she said. Go live your life, Hester said. Practically. Not warmly, that wasn't Hester's register. Just practically, as a piece of advice from someone who had seen a lot of cases and knew that waiting for them to resolve was not a sustainable organizing principle for existence. Evelyn said she would, and meant it, and hung up and looked at the strip of lake between the buildings. She looked at Marianne Holt's training facility and sent an email. Marianne responded within the hour. Not because she was watching her inbox, Evelyn would later understand, but because she received very few emails she needed to think about before answering, and this was not one that required thought. Come Thursday morning, 6 a.m. Bring a swimsuit you can actually move in. Evelyn went Thursday. The training facility was different in October than it had been in the chaos of that morning, 2 months ago, quieter, colder, the outdoor pool covered, and the indoor one lit by the particular underwater light that turned everything slightly green. There were 4 other women there when Evelyn arrived, all of them in various stages of pre-swim preparation, none of them paying her any particular attention. Marianne was in the same red jacket, which Evelyn had wondered if she would ever be able to see without the freight of that morning attached to it. The answer she found was yes, almost immediately. The jacket was just a jacket on a woman who apparently wore red because she liked red. "You swam competitively?" Marianne said, looking at her. Not as a question, she clearly already knew the answer and was establishing baseline. Through college, recreationally for a while after. How long is a while? Until about a year ago. Marianne absorbed this without comment. She handed Evelyn a pull buoy and gestured toward the pool. "Start with 12 laps. I'll watch your stroke. Don't try to be fast, I need to see what you actually do, not what you think you should be doing." Evelyn stood at the edge of the pool. The water was blue-green and still, and smelled like chlorine and the cold, specific smell of a facility that took its work seriously. She had not stood at the edge of a pool in 14 months. She had told herself, when she'd stopped coming, that she was busy, that it was schedule. She had believed this, in the way you believe things you need to believe in order to not look at the thing underneath them. She looked at the water. Then she got in. It was cold. Not brutally, the facility maintained a reasonable temperature, but cold enough to register throughout her body at once. The kind of full-body registration that arrives with immersion, that wakes up things that have been sleeping, that has no metaphorical content, and is also, unavoidably, somewhat metaphorical. She pushed off the wall and started swimming. The first 2 laps were mechanical. Her body, remembering a pattern it hadn't used in over a year, the movement, stilted and slightly wrong the way a familiar language feels when you haven't spoken it in a long time. Her breathing was off. Her kick was low. She was trying too hard, which was what Marianne had told her not to do, but trying too hard was what she had been trained into by a year of Roman's version of exercise, which was about production and result, rather than the relationship between body and water. She stopped trying so hard around the 5th lap. Something shifted. Not dramatically, not a revelation, not a moment of cinematic clarity where music would swell if this were a different kind of story. Just a small physical unlocking. A degree of ease she had forgotten was available, a returning of something she had filed under lost, without properly examining whether it was lost or simply displaced. She swam 12 laps and stopped at the wall and looked up at Marianne. "Your breathing is wrong," Marianne said. 3 strokes per breath on one side, you're avoiding the other side entirely. Your left kick is half what your right is doing, and you're not feeling the water you're moving through it, which is different. "I know," Evelyn said. "You'll fix all of it," Marianne said. "Not today. Over time." She crouched at the pool's edge. "You swam because you loved it once." "Yes. What happened to that?" Evelyn looked at the water. Someone had a lot of opinions about it. About what it should look like and what it should produce. And I let those opinions displace my own. Marianne looked at her with the expression she had worn the morning they'd first met, the specific look of a woman who had seen 100 versions of this particular story and had not become cynical about it because cynicism required you to stop caring, and she had not done that. "Okay," Marianne said. "Come back Tuesday. We'll start working on your left side." Evelyn came back Tuesday and Thursday of that week, and the week after. The investigation moved at the speed of investigations, which was slower than drama and faster than forgetting. By November, 2 of the aldermen named in the archive had resigned. One publicly cited personal reasons. The other made a statement that was legally careful in every direction and said nothing of substance about why. The executive, whose foundation had been profiled twice in the Tribune, took a leave of absence from his company that was announced as health-related and understood by everyone paying attention as something else. Gavin Rourke reached an agreement with federal prosecutors in late November. The terms were not fully public, which was standard. What was clear was that the agreement involved substantial cooperation and the formal surrender of the archive's complete contents, including 3 additional components that had not been in the boathouse boxes. which Gavin had apparently maintained separately as his personal failsafe. The additional components were, by Hester's account, significant. Silas testified in a federal deposition in December. He called Evelyn the evening before, not to ask anything, not to discuss strategy. Just, she understood from the quality of the call, to be in contact with someone who knew the full weight of what he was walking into and would not require him to perform being fine about it. "How are you?" she said. "Tired," he said, honestly tired. "Not afraid, just tired." "That sounds right," she said. "It does," he agreed. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing consequential a neighborhood restaurant she'd been to, a book she'd read, the quality of October versus November as Chicago months. The conversation of people who have been through something together and need, occasionally, to exist in the ordinary world beside each other for a while. Before he hung up, he said, "Vance would have liked you." "I think I would have liked him," she said. She meant it. The specificity of what Peter Vance had done, the years of carrying that archive, the arrangement with Marianne, the careful decision about who should receive it, had grown, over the months, from a fact into something she thought about. He had made a decision about her character before she had made it herself. He had bet on a version of her that she had not yet fully become when he made the bet. She tried to be that version. Not perfectly. She was not interested in perfection, which had been Roman's framework, not hers. She was interested in being honestly, recognizably herself, the self that had existed before 2 years of management had layered other people's preferences over it. That self was imperfect and sometimes afraid, and occasionally excessive in exactly the ways Roman had trained her to believe were flaws. She was working on accepting that those were not flaws. It was slow work. She did not pretend it was otherwise. Roman Kessler left Chicago in February. Not dramatically. No press statement, no public acknowledgement, no scene. Properties went to his lawyers to manage. His organization had been fracturing since November. The men who had stayed loyal did so out of habit rather than conviction. And habit is a weaker currency than it appears when the underlying structure starts to shift. By January, the organization was functionally dissolved. The formal legal process with Roman personally was ongoing and would remain so for some time. His lawyers were good and the law was slow, but Roman was gone from the city. The specific version of Chicago that had organized itself around his influence, his alliances, his carefully maintained network of relationships between criminal organization and legitimate power, that version had collapsed in the way that things collapse when the center cannot hold, not all at once, but in stages, each stage making the next inevitable. Evelyn heard about his departure from Hester, who heard it from Forsyth, who mentioned it in the context of a case update in the specific matter-of-fact way that significant things get mentioned when they have become administrative rather than dramatic. She sat with the information for a day, then she went to the training facility and swam for 90 minutes, and came home and made dinner and called Camille. "He's gone," she said. "I know," Camille said. "Mom called me." "Mom called you. She's processing." A pause. "She's not okay, but she's trying to be, which is about as much as we can expect from her right now." "She chose him," Evelyn said. Not bitterly, accurately. She chose the alliance over the question of whether the alliance was what it presented itself as. "That's going to take her a while to account for." "Yes," Camille said. "It is." Another pause. "How are you?" Evelyn looked at her kitchen. The furniture she'd rearranged. The bookshelf she'd reorganized according to her own system rather than the one Roman had once suggested would look more coherent. The small specific evidence of a space that belonged to her again. "I'm okay," she said. "Not all the way, but more than I was." "The direction," Camille said. "That's the direction," Evelyn agreed. Marianne told her about the open water race in March. She brought it up at the end of a Tuesday session, while Evelyn was drying her hair and the other women in the facility were talking about something that had nothing to do with Evelyn or Roman or ledgers or any of it, which was another small piece of evidence that the world was large and indifferent and full of people living their entire lives in no proximity to hers whatsoever. "There's a crossing in June," Marianne said. 12 miles. North shore to the city side. Open water, lake conditions, full support boat. She looked at Evelyn. I think you should consider it. I've been swimming for 5 months, Evelyn said. I know when you started, Marianne said. Was there. She sat down on the bench across from Evelyn. You have the body for open water. You have the mind for it too. You stay inside the effort rather than fighting it. That's harder to teach than the stroke. She paused. The race isn't about being fast. It's about finishing. It's about getting from one shore to the other, regardless of what the water does on the way. Evelyn looked at her. Think about it, Marianne said. You have 3 months. She thought about it for a week. Then she signed up. Training for an open water crossing was different from lap swimming in the ways she had expected, and in some she hadn't. Pool was controlled temperature, distance, the reliable geometry of the wall at each end. Open water had no walls. Open water was Lake Michigan, which was cold and had its own agenda entirely, which did not include making Evelyn Ashford comfortable or giving her anything predictable to push off of. She had to learn to navigate by sight, to manage cold that sat in the water at 58 degrees in early May and did not apologize for itself, to swim when she couldn't see the bottom, which was a different psychological experience, from swimming where she could, which required a specific kind of self-trust that she discovered, in the process of rebuilding from different material than it had originally been built from. The original material had been, she understood in retrospect, partly built on other people's assessments of her. Romans, her parents, the accumulated weight of being an Ashford, which carried its own expectations about competence and composure and what kinds of things a woman of her position was supposed to be capable of. She had swum from that foundation for years and not known it. The new foundation was different, smaller in some ways, more interior, less concerned with how the effort looked from outside, but more reliable. The kind of thing that didn't depend on someone else continuing to believe in you in order to remain structural. She trained 4 mornings a week through April and May. Marianne adjusted her left kick, which took 6 weeks to correct, and came back wrong twice before it stayed right. She learned to bilateral breathe efficiently, which she had never bothered with in her competitive years, because her right side breath was strong enough that she hadn't needed to. Open water required it. Open water required everything she had. Grant came to watch one of her open water training sessions in May. She didn't invite him. He simply appeared at the facility early on a Saturday morning, which was the kind of thing her father did, showing up at the perimeter of things that mattered to her without requiring formal invitation or acknowledgement. He watched for 2 hours from the shore support area, while she and 2 other women from Marianne's program in Tut swum a 3-mile training loop in 59-degree water with a light chop from the northwest. When she came out of the water, her face was numb, and her hands were clumsy with the cold, and her left shoulder was doing the specific ache it had developed in heavy training weeks that she was managing with ice and stubbornness. She pulled her swim cap off and looked at her father standing on the shore in his good coat, completely incongruous in the casual lakefront training environment. How long has your shoulder been doing that? He said. Weeks, she said. It's getting better. He looked at her. Good hard swim, she said. Good enough. He nodded. He looked at the lake for a moment, the specific look of a man taking in something he had not previously given his full attention to, and finding that it had properties he had not accounted for. Evelyn, he said. Dad. He looked at her. The same look he'd given her in the doorway of the hotel suite, the morning of the wedding, complicated, private, carrying something he was organizing. I should have looked more carefully, he said, at what I was walking you toward. He stopped. I knew what Roman was. Not the specifics, but the shape of it, and I decided the shape didn't matter because the alliance was advantageous. He paused. That was a failure. It was my failure. Not your mother's, not the family's. Mine. She stood on the lake shore in the May morning, cold water running off her, shoulder aching, hair flattened, and looked at her father. I know, she said. I'm sorry, he said. She had not heard her father say those words, that arrangement in that order, directed at her more than twice in her life. Grant Ashford apologized the way he did most emotional things. Rarely, specifically, and only when he was certain he meant it. She was certain he meant it. She put her hand on his arm, briefly. Cold hand on his good coat sleeve. "We're okay," she said. "We're working on it." "Yes," he said, "we are." They stood on the shore for another minute. Then she went to get warm. The race was on a Saturday in late June. 12 miles, north shore to the city side of the lake. The weather on race morning was complicated, not dangerous. Marianne determined after checking with the support team at 5 a.m., but not clean. A moderate chop from the northeast, water temperature at 61 degrees, cloud cover that would make navigation by landmark slightly harder. Acceptable conditions for open water, not comfortable ones. Evelyn stood at the water's edge at 6:15 with 19 other swimmers. She had her goggles on her forehead and her swim cap in her hand, and she was looking at the water the way she'd learned to look at it in training, reading the surface, reading what was underneath the surface, reading the specific relationship between wind and chop that would determine how she managed the first 3 miles before she found her rhythm. Her family was on the shore. Grant, Camille, and she had been surprised by this Patricia, who had come without being asked, and who stood on the shore in a coat that was too formal for the occasion, in the way Patricia always dressed for things she was uncomfortable with, which meant she was wearing armor, and she was here anyway. Evelyn had looked at her mother for a moment, before walking to the start. Patricia had looked back. The thing between them was still complicated. Would probably be complicated for a long time. Patricia had made choices that had mattered, and she had made them from a system of belief that was genuinely hers and that had genuinely not served her daughter, and the accounting between those two things was ongoing, and not finished and not clean. Evelyn did not expect it to become clean. She expected it to become navigable. That was sufficient. She had nodded at her mother. Patricia had nodded back, and that was enough for today. Marianne was at her shoulder now, doing the last check. Goggles sealed correctly. Timing chip secure. Water bottle for the support boat verified. "How are you feeling?" Marianne said. "Scared," Evelyn said. "Good," Marianne said. "Fear means you understand what you're about to do." "What happens if I can't finish?" "The support boat pulls you out." Marianne looked at her steadily. "But you're going to finish. You don't know that." "No," Marianne said. "I don't." She paused. "But I know that you have been getting in water that scared you for 5 months, and not stopping when it got hard. And I know that the women who do that, who keep going, not because it's easy, but because they decided it was theirs, they finish." The starting signal was 2 minutes away. Evelyn pulled her swim cap on and seated her goggles and looked at the water. 12 miles of Lake Michigan, cold and choppy and indifferent to her specifically, containing no opinion about whether she succeeded, offering nothing but its own conditions, which were the conditions she had to work with. She thought about Roman, the way he had organized 2 years of her life around his version of what her body should be, and what it was for, and what kind of effort was appropriate, and what kind of attention it deserved. She thought the laugh she'd heard through the sunroom door, the thing that had broken the architecture of everything he'd built, not because it revealed something new, but because it made undeniable something she had chosen not to see. She thought about the photograph she'd sent. The afternoon light in the seamstress's studio. The uncomplicated happiness of that moment. She held that moment. The last version of herself that had existed before the hallway. The version that had taken a photograph and sent it because she was happy and wanted to share it. That version had not been destroyed by what came after. She could see that now. It had been buried, and it had been managed, and it had been worked on by 2 years of someone else's ideas about what it should look like. But it was still there, standing at the edge of Lake Michigan in 61-degree water on a cloudy June morning. She could feel it clearly. The starting signal sounded. She went in. The cold hit her everywhere at once, that full-body registration, that waking up of things. She took the first strokes and found the rhythm faster than she expected. Her body moving with the muscle memory of 5 months of consistent work, and underneath that the older memory, the one from before, the one that belonged to her. The shore fell away behind her. The city was 12 miles ahead, invisible in the cloud cover, present in the specific of that destinations are present when you can't see them, held in the knowledge that they exist rather than the sight of them. She swam. The chop pushed against her, and she worked with it the way Marianne had taught her, not fighting, reading, taking the energy of the water and using it rather than spending herself against it. Her left shoulder ached in the second mile the way it always ached in the second mile now, and she adjusted her rotation slightly and kept going. The support boat was a shape at her periphery, present without being intrusive, doing its job. She thought briefly about the scar beneath her left shoulder blade, the one Roman and his men had discussed behind closed doors. The one she had been self-conscious about for years before Roman had said, on a boat one summer evening, that it was nothing to hide, and she had believed him, which had been one of the moments that felt most like love, and was, she now understood, something more complicated than that. The scar was there. It was always there. It went into the water with her, invisible beneath the surface, not requiring anyone's opinion about it. The third mile opened into something that felt close to free. Not easy, the water was cold, and her shoulder was aching, and the chop was giving her trouble on the left side where it always did. But free in the way that sustained effort becomes free when you stop trying to be done and accept that you are simply in it, moving through it, carrying nothing that doesn't belong to you. She carried nothing that didn't belong to her. She swam the 4th mile, and the 5th, and the 6th, and somewhere around the 7th, the cloud cover broke, and the city appeared, a line on the water. The specific skyline of Chicago from the lake. A view she had known since she was a child. And that looked different from out here than it did from shore. Smaller in some ways, more proportional. The city just being the city, indifferent and enormous, full of the lives of millions of people who would never know her name. She swam toward it. The 8th mile and the 9th and the 10th, and her shoulder was a sustained complaint now, rather than an acute one, and her breathing was efficient, and her kick was even, and the city was getting larger and more specific, and the water was cold, and she was still in it, and still moving. The 11th mile. She thought about the 4 boxes on Grant's kitchen floor, about Hester's legal pad, about Gavin standing in the rain giving her a combination, about Silas in a coffee shop saying she had done in one morning what he'd spent 11 years moving toward. About Marianne at the pool's edge saying you're not feeling the water, you're moving through it, which is different. She felt the water now. She had learned. The 12th mile arrived with the gradual clarity of something that had been true for a while before she could see it. The finish line was a string of buoys and a crowd of people she couldn't distinguish yet, and the specific sound of a crowd that had been waiting for swimmers to arrive, carrying in it her family somewhere, carrying in it people who had no idea who she was. Her shoulder was burning. Her kick was still even. She swam to the buoys. Through them, she found the bottom with her feet and stood up in water that reached her chest and then her waist and then her thighs, and she walked the last 20 yards to shore the way. You walk through water slowly, with the water pushing back and then releasing the transition from missing creature to standing person happening gradually, rather than all at once. She came out of the lake. The scar on her left shoulder blade was invisible beneath her swimsuit, and it did not matter whether it was visible or not. She knew it was there. It was hers. It had always been hers. She pulled her goggles off her face. Camille hit her first full speed, not measuring it, the embrace of someone who had been watching from shore for several hours and had made the specific calculation that her sister needed to be grabbed, and was correct. Evelyn grabbed back, hard, cold-handed, and warm in the chest simultaneously. Her father was there when Camille released her, and Grant Ashford, who did not cry in public and had not cried in front of her since she was 11 years old and their family dog had died, was crying, which he was attempting to manage by looking slightly dim to the left of her face while he put his hand on her shoulder. She put her hand on his arm. Her mother was there, too. Standing slightly back, the formal coat damp at the hem from the crowd at the waterline, her face doing something Evelyn had never seen on it before, something that was simply open. Not composed, not managing, just open and wet around the eyes, and present in the uncomplicated way that Patricia Ashford was rarely present, because presence without management was not something she had practiced. Evelyn looked at her. Patricia reached out and touched her daughter's face. Her hand was cool and dry, and slightly uncertain, the gesture of a woman doing something she had no developed vocabulary for. Evelyn didn't say anything, neither did Patricia. Some things were allowed to exist without being spoken into existence. She was learning that too. Marianne was at the edge of the support crew area, not coming forward, giving the family their moment, reading the room the way she always read things, with a specific intelligence of someone who understood what people needed without requiring them to articulate it. She caught Evelyn's eye across the crowd and gave her a single nod. The nod of a woman who had seen what she needed to see. Evelyn nodded back. She turned and looked at the lake. It was still doing what it had been doing for the last several hours, moving, indifferent, cold, enormous, carrying no opinion about what had just crossed it. The water she had come from was the same water it always was. The city was behind her now. The shore she had started from was 12 miles away and invisible. She stood there for a moment. Roman was gone from Chicago. Gavin's archive was in federal custody. Silas was in the slow process of accounting for 11 years of careful silence. Vance's careful arrangement had done what he had designed it to do. The network of men who had passed her photograph between them and traded her vulnerability like currency and laughed about her body in private rooms had spent the last several months discovering that private rooms were not as permanent as they had believed. None of that was justice in the clean version. None of it gave back 2 years. None of it changed the specific nature of the laugh she had heard through a cracked door on what was supposed to be the morning of her wedding. But she was standing on the shore of Lake Michigan in June with her family around her and her shoulder aching and her hair still dripping and 12 miles of open water behind her. And the scar they had once laughed about was on her body where it had always been, and her body had just carried her across miles of cold, indifferent, honest water that held no one's opinion of it. She breathed. She belonged to no organization, no alliance, no empire of arranged relationships and managed appearances. She belonged to herself. She had always belonged to herself. She had simply had to cross 12 miles of open water in 61-degree conditions to stand on the shore and remember it clearly. The lake moved behind her. She turned away from it and walked back toward her family, and the crowd parted without knowing who she was, and the city was loud and alive and indifferent and enormous all around her. And the morning was just the morning, ordinary and sufficient, and it was enough. It was exactly enough.